At the start of the new millennium, the NBA was fresh off of its most popular years in existence, led by arguably the greatest icon that any sport has ever had. Passing that gargantuan torch and building off of that momentum would be no easy task. At the time, some even considered it to be an impossible task. With that being said, the 2000s had a lot to offer, as it developed into one of the richest eras in NBA history in terms of talent. There was no shortage of stars and personalities. Isolation wing scorers were plentiful, as there were a large number of players who were speculated to be the next Michael Jordan. But it was also the greatest era for the power forward position, representing several of the 25 greatest players of all time. There were also point guards who were way ahead of their time, all competing for the title of the best at their position. And of course, you had a once-in-a-lifetime unstoppable force at the center position, in Shaquille O'Neal. This decade was an amazing combination of attitude and style, and before the age of super teams, this league was packed with individuals who were capable and proud to drag their teams to the playoffs. Say what you want about the 80s and 90s being the golden years of the NBA, but to many of us, including yours truly, the 2000s is right there at the very top. In many ways, I don't think this player's legacy has aged all that gracefully, but make no mistake, Carmelo Anthony was one of my favorite players to ever set foot on the hardwood, thanks to what he brought to the table during his prime years. Sure, he had his flaws. He was nowhere close to being an elite defensive player. There were questions about his mentality, his work ethic, and on whether or not he cared about his buckets more than being a leader. There's legitimate conversations to be had there, but I think those negatives are far outweighed by the positives. For example, even when considering all of NBA history, Melo had one of the most complete skill sets as a scorer. Even Kobe Bryant echoed this sentiment in 2011.
Let's talk about challenges. Who is the toughest mark for you?
Oh, it's Carmelo Anthony, by far. His size, man, his strength, and he knows how to use it. So he throws his weight around. But if you look at the game, if you look at some of the other players, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, some of these other guys, they're either all the way to the basket or long range. Melo can post up, he can finish at the rim. He has a mid-range game. He has a three-ball game. He can pull up left, can pull up right, step back left, step back right. So that gives you a lot of options as an offensive player.
Beyond his scoring abilities, there is no question in my mind that Melo had a lasting impact on his franchise. Before Melo was drafted by Denver, the Nuggets were arguably the worst organization in all of basketball. In the 9 years leading up to Melo being drafted, the Nuggets averaged 26 wins per season. They had 11 wins in 1998, 14 wins in 1999, 35 in 2000, 40 in 2001, 27 in 2002, and 17 in 2003. Then Carmelo comes in as the third pick in the 2003 draft, and with the help of the recently acquired Andre Miller, Melo improves the Nuggets by 25 wins over the previous season, which earned him a playoff berth. That year, he averaged 21, 6, and 3 while finishing second in the Rookie of the Year voting. Although LeBron finished first for that honor, there is certainly a strong argument that it should have gone to Melo instead, as Anthony was more efficient from the field, from three-point range, and from the free throw line. And unlike LeBron, he also played in all 82 games that season. In a way, you could make the argument that Melo resurrected Denver basketball, because after nearly a decade straight of losing seasons, suddenly Melo made the Nuggets a winning franchise every single year he played for them. Throughout his time with the Nuggets, he started establishing himself as one of the most clutch players in the entire league. In fact, I remember vividly during that time, the debate was often between him and Kobe Bryant for the title of the best closer in the entire league. It might sound crazy in hindsight, but the numbers actually back this up. Since the year 2000, with less than 24 seconds left in the game, no one has made more go-ahead baskets than Carmelo Anthony, with a whopping total of 30. What's even more impressive is the fact that Melo made 37.5% of his shots in those situations. So not only does Melo have the most, but he was also the most efficient by far. Now with all that being said, it's no secret that Carmelo never won a championship during his NBA career. And sure, some of his shortcomings played into that, like his subpar defense. But acting like that alone is enough to completely disqualify a player might be a little unfair when you consider the fact that many subpar defenders have been able to win championships in the right situation. The truth is, Carmelo is one of the most unlucky players in the history of the game, as things kept happening throughout his career that kept undercutting whatever hopes he had. For example, at the very start of his career, the Detroit Pistons made a huge mistake when they took the 7-foot Serbian Darko Milicic with the second overall pick instead of Melo. Now things still worked out for Detroit as they had one of the greatest defensive teams in league history, and went on to win an NBA championship that season regardless of their mistake. If they had taken Melo instead, then they could have significantly improved their offense, while giving themselves a reliable closer alongside of Chauncey Billups. It also would have enabled their defensive wing stopper, Tayshaun Prince, to own a role off the bench as a situational lockdown guy, in a way that would be similar to Michael Cooper on the Showtime Lakers or Andre Iguodala on the Golden State Warriors. This point can be debated, but I have a hard time seeing Melo not winning at least 2 rings if Detroit takes him instead. And if that was the case, we can only imagine how that would change the narratives about his legacy. After getting drafted by one of, if not the worst organization at the time, it took a while, but he finally had the support he needed to compete for a championship in the 08-09 season, thanks to the acquisition of Chauncey Billups. In the second round of that postseason run, Melo sent Dirk Nowitzki and the Mavericks home in just 5 games, as he averaged an efficient 30 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 steals. Then once again, he got unlucky, as he ran into Kobe Bryant and the Lakers in the West Finals, who were on an absolute mission that year. Despite the loss, Melo and Kobe battled in one of the greatest playoff solo duels that we've ever seen. Then he definitely shot himself in the foot by forcing a trade to New York prematurely, when he could have just waited for his opportunity to do it cleanly in free agency. But still, he should have had better opportunities in New York. But once again, his best chance was ruined by things that were out of his control. Like in the 2012 and 2013 playoffs, where they needed all hands on deck to take on the Big Three Miami Heat and the talented Indiana Pacers. But in both instances, their second best player, Amari Stoudemire, missed entire playoff games due to injuries. The reality is, when you consider the full context, Carmelo Anthony has a very complicated legacy. His defense, his ego, his conditioning, and how he handled the Jeremy Lin situation are things that are subject to criticism. But he was also an all-time great scorer, incredibly clutch, and was a big game performer. But unfortunately, it only seems like the negative aspects of his career are the things that are remembered today. But if you ask me, Carmelo at his best was a problem. And if the luck factor had just worked a little bit more in his favor, then I do believe he could have been an NBA champion, whose talent would be celebrated to a much greater extent in this current day.
As a team, that's the way we've approached this whole season, is that we're going to all do this together. And, we're not labeled as a team with one great superstar. I mean, we just got a lot of guys to come out and play hard.
The 1999-2000 Portland Trail Blazers were a team in the truest sense of the word, and hard work was its calling card. The Blazers tied the second-best record in franchise history with 59 regular season victories and advanced to the Western Conference Finals for the second straight year. The talents were obvious, but many feared there was too much talent on this squad and that egos would clash. It couldn't have been farther from the truth, as sacrifice for the good of the team was a common theme.
Because Kobe Bryant can't get in foul trouble, neither can Shaq. The Blazers, they have 10 very good players.
One of the topics that keeps coming up on my channel between me and my viewers is who is the greatest team in NBA history that didn't win a championship. Now, there are a lot of great candidates for that title, and honestly, I could see my mind changing on that from a month-to-month basis, simply because the field is so competitive, and I can make a case for many different teams. But what I can say with complete certainty is that not only is this team one of the best teams in NBA history to fail to win a championship, but they also have an argument for being the deepest NBA team of all time. I'm talking about the 1999 to 2000 Portland Trail Blazers, a team that was extremely talented, but that was also surrounded by controversy. One of their more unflattering nicknames was the quote Portland Jailblazers, due to all the issues that they were having off the court. With that being said, this team was constructed with one goal in mind, an NBA championship. As the Shaq and Kobe Lakers were rising and ready to begin the start of their dynasty, the Blazers were positioning themselves to be their greatest challenger. For one, the size of this Portland team was absolutely insane, which made them the perfect counter for a prime Shaquille O'Neal. Arvydas Sabonis was 7 foot 3 inches tall, Rasheed Wallace was 6'11", Jermaine O'Neal was 6'11", Brian Grant was 6'9", and even their small forward in Detlef Schrempf was 6'10". Not only was this team extremely deep, but they were incredibly well balanced. Leading this group was a seasoned veteran coming off of 6 NBA championships of his own, Scottie Pippen. At the age of 34, he wasn't quite the same lethal force that he once was in Chicago. But with that being said, he was still a battle-tested point forward, and even in his advanced age, he played all 82 games for the Portland Trail Blazers. He was also second team all-defense and even finished 8th overall in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. He was averaging about 14 points per game, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists, while also having improved himself as a three-point shooter. Their leading scorer was their all-star Rasheed Wallace, who was quite simply one of the best back-to-the-basket players in the entire league. He was an incredible scorer when he chose to be, and he was usually their go-to option late in fourth quarters. His major weakness, though, was his temper, as he was one of the all-time leaders in technical fouls, and he always seemed like he was getting them at the worst time possible. Their starting shooting guard was the 30-year-old Steve Smith, who was second on the team in scoring, putting up 16 points per game, and who also played all 82 games that year. Steve was not only a great scorer coming off of his days in Atlanta, but he was also still one of the best three-point shooters in the entire league, hitting about 40% from distance. Their point guard was the explosive scorer Damon Stoudemire, who at the age of 26 had an endless motor and was a major spark plug for this group. Their starting center was one of the greatest basketball players, especially overseas. His name was Arvydas Sabonis. At 35 years old, Sabonis was not the force that he once was. But with that being said, he was still a key contributor for this group, was an efficient shooter, and was one of the best passing big men in the entire league. And all of that was just their starting five. The first man to come off the bench was the 6'10" small forward Detlef Schrempf, who was famous for his contributions in Seattle when they made it all the way to the NBA Finals in 1996. At this later stage of his career, Schrempf was still averaging about 13 points per game, and he was very well known for being a great spark plug off the bench, seeing that he had already won multiple Sixth Man of the Year awards. Then you had a 32-year-old point guard in Greg Anthony, who was shooting 38% from three-point range. The quality power forward in Brian Grant was 27 years old and gave the Blazers yet another solid body to throw at Shaq. The 23-year-old Bonzi Wells was a great perimeter shooter, hitting about 38% of his threes, and was also a great wing defender to throw at Kobe. And the 10th man in the rotation was the 21-year-old center Jermaine O'Neal, who would eventually go on to be an MVP candidate in Indiana. But in the meantime, here in Portland, he'd have to settle for 12 minutes a game. As it was mentioned in the intro of this video, this team was stupid deep, and they believed they had everything necessary to not only defeat Shaq, Kobe, and the Los Angeles Lakers, but to go on to win the NBA championship. They had a dominant regular season, going 59-23. They were a top 5 team in the league, both offensively and defensively. When it got to the NBA playoffs, it seemed as if they had no equal, as they steamrolled over Kevin Garnett and the Minnesota Timberwolves, defeating them in the first round 3-1. Then they gentlemen swept Karl Malone, John Stockton, and the Utah Jazz in the second round. Then they met up with the Los Angeles Lakers, where a gargantuan battle ensued. The Lakers actually got off to a 3-1 lead in the series, but that's when the Blazers showed their resilience and won games 5 and 6, forcing a 7th game in Los Angeles. I think at this point, many of you guys know how the rest of the story goes. The Blazers had a 16-point lead with the fourth quarter approaching of Game 7. Staples Center was completely quiet as the momentum was completely in the Blazers' hands. But that's when the Lakers started to storm back. And everybody remembers Shaq and Kobe getting on fire and the supporting cast of Los Angeles hitting all those crucial three-point shots. But what people usually forget is what happened to the Blazers, as they went cold. Ice cold. Not only did they fail to score a basket for about 9 minutes straight, but they missed 13 straight field goal attempts. By the time their best player, Rasheed Wallace, finally hit a basket, it was too little, too late, as the Lakers were on their way to not only winning the series, but eventually winning the NBA championship. This Blazers team was this close to winning an NBA championship, and if they had actually pulled it off and not had their worst fourth quarter performance in their most significant game of the entire year, then I can only imagine how much that would have changed up NBA history. Imagine a universe where Scottie Pippen has more NBA championships than Michael Jordan. Imagine a universe where Kobe and Shaq have less rings than they actually do. And imagine the Blazers franchise not just being known for their lone NBA championship in 1977, but also having a second Larry O'Brien trophy thanks to their performance in the year 2000. Ultimately, it's a make-or-miss league. And unfortunately, the harsh truth is that going cold for a couple minutes can be all the difference from being a forgotten footnote in NBA history and from reaching basketball immortality.
Even Ralph Nader says he wants to have like official inquiry into the refs. What do you guys think of that? You think the refs perhaps were not as accurate as they could have been?
Well, we really can't say too much about it, but other people seen what happened.
Now, that's
I believed that night when I covered that game here in Los Angeles that it was an abomination, that it was an embarrassment to the league, that it was the worst officiated contest in professional basketball I'd ever seen.
Tonight, a former NBA referee says the playoff series between the Kings and Lakers in 2002 was fixed.
We all said at the time, something's wrong here. The Kings were a better team, but that game was not right. I'm telling you, I was there. That was not right.
What do you think the public's perception is of the integrity of the NBA officials?
0. The integrity of the game has been shot.
What surprises me that the league doesn't do anything about it.
Chucky Brown put me, so they might. If they're bringing a certain crew, it's going to go a certain way. I was like, man, bullshit, man. It's the NBA. Ain't no way. We're up 20 points every game, man. Ain't nothing, even if they do, ain't could stop.
Right.
And so just watching that, man, just seeing it, looking back now, that shit makes me sick, man, because I think that could have been our championship.
And so, obviously, you've seen what happened in the game. But, we were definitely the better team that year. I know that for sure. But
who was the greatest team in NBA history that didn't win a championship? To be honest, for quite a while, I had a really hard time giving a definitive answer to this question simply because there has been so many great teams in the rich history of the NBA. So how do you narrow it down to just one? But then I had this thought process. Yes, there are many great teams that didn't win, and many teams that came close to winning. But of those teams, there was only one group that I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt deserved to win the title, but was screwed out of it by corruption. Of course, I'm talking about the 2001 to 2002 Sacramento Kings. I imagine many of you don't need an explanation of what happened, but I'll give you a brief summary just in case some of you are unfamiliar. In the early 2000s, the NBA was still rebounding from a massive decline in viewership after Michael Jordan's retirement from the Bulls. One of the sure bets to get views and generate plenty of revenue for the NBA was Shaq, Kobe, and the Los Angeles Lakers. Later on in an interview, David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA at the time, was asked about his personal preference for an NBA Finals matchup, to which he controversially answered, the Lakers versus the Lakers. It made sense considering that this Los Angeles team was exciting, dramatic, and bolstered a massive market. On the other hand, there was the Sacramento Kings. an underdog squad that was lacking the dazzling names and flair of Los Angeles, while being represented by a very small market, with a stadium and Arco Arena that looked remote and desolate compared to the raucous city atmosphere of Staples Center. From a money-making standpoint, there was no question to anyone at the time which team the league office would prefer to make the NBA Finals. So when Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals happened, much of the sports world started crying foul. In that contest, the Lakers shot 27 free throws in the fourth quarter alone, compared to the Kings' total of 9. Every call was seemingly going in the favor of Los Angeles, and even some of the no calls as well, like this elbow from Kobe Bryant to Mike Bibby's face in the most crucial moment. Kings players, coaches, and fans were all appearing to be dumbfounded as the game flew out of their grasp. As you saw in the intro of this video, there was plenty of suspicion at the conclusion of the 2002 West Finals. But after some time, there would be some cold hard evidence. In 2008, Tim Donaghy, a former NBA referee who was guilty on betting on basketball games that he officiated, said that the NBA rigged the 2002 playoff series. Specifically, he said that allegedly, the league scheduled Dick Bavetta to officiate the sixth game, with an agenda to get the Lakers the victory. If that is indeed true, then he succeeded in his mission, and the Lakers would go on to win the series and easily win the championship in a 4-game sweep over the vastly inferior New Jersey Nets. So now you know the essentials of the situation, but now here's my perspective. My history with this team is actually a rather interesting one. For the entirety of my life, I have been a passionate Lakers fan. Growing up in Central California, I had plenty of friends who were either Lakers fans or Kings fans. The rivalry that developed was intense, not just between the teams, but between the fan bases as well. I hated this squad and delighted in their misery. So you can only imagine how happy I was when the Lakers defeated them in the Western Conference Finals. But in the years since, that positive memory has been growing more and more bitter. As someone who appreciates the history of the game and has made it my career goal to put a spotlight on the overlooked talents of NBA history, I've had to witness this former great Sacramento team fade into obscurity. In 2002, Chris Webber was in the argument for the title of the best power forward in the entire league. But you wouldn't know it because in the years since, people only talk about Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki as the best power forwards from that era. Mike Bibby was the ideal co-star. He was a fundamentally sound player who was born for the playoff atmosphere, as he remained calm, cool, and collected under pressure. The acquisition of Bibby in the summer of 2001 was the move that elevated them from a good team to a team that was ready to win a championship. Yet with that being said, he's somehow become overshadowed to the other point guard they had before him, Jason Williams, as White Chocolate is more known today due to his flashy passes and his incredible handle. Then they had Peja Stoyakovich, who was a certified sniper and a terrific scorer, and he was also without question one of the greatest perimeter shooters in the history of the league. Yet somehow, he's never brought up in that conversation in this modern day. One of the greatest wing defenders of that era was Doug Christie, as he should be remembered for his tenacity and competitive spirit. But he's basically only talked about today because of his coaching career. For a 5-year stretch, Bobby Jackson was arguably the best sixth man of that era. But if you bring him up today, many young people will say, Bobby who? Hedo Turkoglu was a solid weapon off the bench, and even Vlade Divac doesn't get enough credit for the role he played on this team, as he was one of the best passing big men that the game had to offer. Rick Adelman is certainly one of the greatest coaches in league history, but is almost never mentioned in that conversation simply because he finished his impressive coaching career with 2 trips to the NBA Finals, but not a single championship ring. One of the deepest and most cohesive teams in NBA history is basically being overlooked and forgotten in every aspect today, simply because they didn't win the championship necessary to immortalize them in that way. But, as we all know, they probably should have. Overall, their ball movement and team-first approach should be celebrated today on the same level as the 2013 San Antonio Spurs or the 1986 Boston Celtics. But they're not. So even with the rivalry and even with my dislike of this team, I've grown sympathetic. I recognize the injustice that was done to this squad, as they should be celebrated today in basketball lore. Let me make this clear. This team wasn't a fluke of a contender. This was a team who believed that they could win the championship, who prepared each offseason for Shaq and Kobe in the NBA playoffs. They won 61 games, earned home court advantage throughout the postseason, and were on the verge of putting an end to the Lakers dynasty. But within a matter of moments, in a pivotal 6th game, all of that was stripped away, as they were basically powerless to prevent it. In my opinion, the 01-02 Sacramento Kings are the greatest team to never win a championship because they more so than any other failing team deserve to be champions. My advice to fellow Laker fans is go ahead, enjoy the 2002 championship and talk your trash, because that's what sports is all about. But when it comes to the 2002 Kings and their fans, always give them their respect, because that was truly a special rivalry, and if the allegations are in fact true, then it's honestly horrible that they couldn't get their legitimate shot at a title without outside influences screwing things up.
Patrick has that task. There have been nearly as many new Jordan clones as old Jordan championships. Grant, Penny, Jerry, Kobe.
And here's the kid to slam it. Whoa!
The answer. They all left questions, but the latest lookalike most closely profiles the infant Mike. Tar Heel pedigree, dazzling smile, leaves school early, becomes team go-to guy, resurrects Hoopstead City, jumps over the moon, air to land to high sea, sea as in Carter, Vince Carter.
Both of us slashers like to get to the basket and do highlight real dunks or whatever.
Vince has exploded on the scene. Michael came a little more quietly, kind of subtly. He had all aspects of what he did later on, but that had to curate, or if that's the word, or cure, as a ham would do.
As Jordan did do, Carter is curing himself into quite a ham.
I know that Michael, meant a lot for the NBA, and I think right now Vince is that same type of commodity.
I can see it, but let's not get ridiculous. You're talking about Michael Jordan.
The difference in him is that Vince does not have the ball handling ability that MJ had.
MJ is often imitated, never duplicated, but you have to say that he's the next thing close to MJ.
Nobody remembers Michael Jordan except maybe you and Kevin Lockery in his rookie year and how much he developed during the course of his career. Vince Carter does some things better than Michael did when he first came in the league. Vince Carter can stroke the three-pointer. Michael was a marginal perimeter shooter when he started off. Vince Carter blocks shots, leads his team in block shots, gets 6 rebounds a game, and has electrifying play very similar to Michael Jordan when he takes the ball to the basket. So it's not a comparison that's out of this world, really. There are similarities between the two guys, and you might even say Vince Carter has a little edge on the Michael Jordan who was a rookie.
Is there pressure as you grow in stature that every arena you go to, people come out to see Vince Carter?
So there's been a rather interesting conversation happening on social media over the last couple of days concerning one of the most highlight-worthy players in the history of the game. Nowadays, Vince Carter is known as the greatest dunker of all time and is recognized for the incredible talent that he was during his prime. But was he actually the face of the NBA at one point in time? The mere suggestion might sound crazy to some, because although Carter was extremely talented, it's hard for younger fans to envision how he could be that popular and that highly regarded while guys like Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Allen Iverson, and Tim Duncan were in the league simultaneously. Well, the truth is, there's some important context that younger fans are often missing. For one, Vince Carter was drafted the same offseason that Michael Jordan retired from the Chicago Bulls. At that point in time, the league office was deeply concerned about the NBA's life after Michael Jordan. And for good reason. MJ's iconic popularity helped make basketball a global sport. And under MJ's reign, the NBA experienced the greatest television ratings that it's ever had. Because of this, the media was obsessed with the idea of finding the quote, next Michael Jordan. And several players were given that mantle, and some very prematurely. Guys like Harold Miner, Jerry Stackhouse, Grant Hill, and obviously Kobe Bryant were all put under that immense pressure. But even more recently to receive that comparison was half man, half amazing Vince Carter. Honestly, unlike some of the others, this comparison made total sense at the time. Like Michael Jordan, Carter was a former North Carolina Tar Heel. He had a remarkable leaping ability and had the perfect combination of skill and athleticism. Now, of course, the NBA isn't just a sport, but it's also a business. And you'd be silly to think that the league doesn't have its own money-making agenda when they decide who to promote. Vince Carter was the perfect candidate for this role, because he had just made his league debut with the Toronto Raptors in 1998, and the Raptors were a new expansion team, who had the responsibility of making the league popular in another country. From that perspective, it made sense for the league to relentlessly promote Carter, because the potential extra revenue was immense. And thus, Air Canada was born. Now, Carter had an impressive rookie season that even had some people saying that he was on the level of Michael Jordan in his rookie year. But the hype train truly reached its insane heights during the 1999 to 2000 season. As you all know, Carter put on an absolute show during the All-Star weekend. And then, later on that summer, he led Team USA to the gold medal in the Olympics, while accomplishing the greatest highlight in Olympic basketball history. This was the beginning of Carter leading the NBA in All-Star votes, including 3 straight seasons from 2000 to 2002. That's right, more people wanted Carter in the All-Star game than Allen Iverson and Tim Duncan while they were winning MVPs, and even more so than Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal while they were winning championships. Vinsanity was on the cover of video games, magazines, he was in music videos, TV shows, and movies. If basketball was anywhere, you could find Carter there between 1999 to 2002. Now, this next personal point might seem a little silly, but I think it appropriately emphasizes how the basketball community viewed Vince Carter at the time. So basically, I've been an avid card collector ever since I was a child. And throughout my years of collecting cards, I've been picking up these Beckett Price Guide magazines, which basically tells you the market value of your cards and the confidence level that investors have in certain players and their potential. If you were to pick up a recent issue like this one I've got here, then you'll see that Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Kobe Bryant have some of the most valuable cards, as expected. Now, this issue of mine is much older. This is the August issue from the year 2000. Meaning Shaq and Kobe just won their first championship. And even with that being the case, Vince Carter still had the most valuable cards on the market of any active player. More so than Kobe, Shaq, Duncan, or Allen Iverson. It wasn't until this issue, in March of 2003, that I noticed that Kobe's cards had finally surpassed Carter's in terms of value. It took 3 straight championships from Kobe for people to finally think that Carter was no longer the card to chase, which is insane when you think about it. If you ask me, Vince Carter was definitely the face of the NBA, although it was a short stint compared to some legends of the game. I would say from 1999 until about May of 2001, Carter was the guy that the league was promoting as the face of their sport. But with his missed shot in Game 7 of the 2001 East semifinals, that's the moment where I believe the momentum shifted, and Allen Iverson became the face of the Eastern Conference, while Shaq and Kobe were becoming the faces of the league as a whole.
I could never really bring myself to become a real fan of Allen Iverson, the basketball player, because in the end, he was mostly a solo act. He was, as I often called him, me, myself, and Iverson.
Today's video is something that has become a highly debated topic in modern NBA discussions. As crazy as it sounds, Allen Iverson himself has become a topic of dissension. If you were alive to see him play during his prime, then you probably don't question the greatness of the answer, as he was spectacular to many of us with his insane speed, crossover dribbles, remarkable stamina, and his absolute relentlessness when attacking the basket. Many of us fondly remember his legendary 2000 to 2001 MVP campaign, where he took the league by storm, made an improbable run to the NBA Finals, and even defeated the previously unbeaten Shaq and Kobe Lakers in Game 1, where he dropped 48 points, which was capped off with one of the most iconic moments in basketball history. The thing is, Iverson isn't often thought of as fondly by the younger, more modern fans. To some people, he seems to get extra points for the fact that he was part of a cultural movement, and was arguably the coolest player in the entire league. They'll say, sure, he might have been a star for the camera, but was he purely, truly as good of a hooper as advertised? Or is it just exaggerated by enamored fans from that era? The way the basketball community analyzes players has changed over the years, and now so much of the game is evaluated through the lens of analytics. This unfortunately was not the strongest or most timeless aspect of Iverson's game, as he was a career 42.5% shooter from the field, which was just 51.8% in terms of true shooting percentage. To many fans nowadays, efficiency is everything, and when Allen Iverson was named the league's MVP in 2001, he was shooting only 42% from the field that season. For some perspective, among MVP winning seasons, that is the second worst field goal percentage in NBA history, trailing only Bob Cousy in 1957, who shot 37.8% from the field. So already, some people will be critical of Iverson's MVP season, seeing that he was very clearly a volume scorer by the standards of most NBA seasons. But that part is critical. I said most NBA seasons. That's because in 2001, the NBA was in the middle of what's called the dead ball era, where the pace of play was much slower as the offensive rules were much stricter, and defenses were permitted to do more things physically. This resulted in an era with lower scoring and lower field goal percentages league-wide. Over the last 3 seasons in the NBA, the league average has been 47.2% from the field, and that high percentage is even with the inflation of three-point shots, as they're attempting 3 times the amount of threes they shot in 2001. And in Iverson's MVP season, the league was shooting an average of 44.3%, which is actually the 4th lowest of any season since the NBA merger. It wasn't just Iverson who experienced a very low field goal percentage that season, but many All-Star players did. For example, trailing Iverson as the league's second leading scorer was Jerry Stackhouse, who averaged nearly 30 points per game on only 40.2% shooting. Jason Kidd was 4th in the MVP voting, and he shot just 41.1%. Antoine Walker was a star player who finished 11th in the league in scoring, and he shot just 41.3%. As you can see, it's not incredibly uncommon for star players to shoot the same or even a worse field goal percentage than Allen Iverson did at that time. Also then consider that Iverson was the league's leader in field goal attempts per game, at a whopping 25.5, and it is analytically proven that players generally shoot the ball less efficiently as their attempts per game increases. Then you need to consider the load that Allen Iverson had to carry for his team offensively. Even with Iverson on the team, the 76ers finished that season in the bottom half of the league in terms of points per game. The answer contributed the highest percentage of his team's points of any player that season, and no one else was even close. Now, I'm not trying to spin Allen Iverson into some sort of model of efficiency, but when you consider the era, his volume, the load that he had to carry offensively, and the way the defenses focused on him specifically, well then it's no wonder that he was able to win the league MVP despite shooting just 42% from the field. And if people are trying to make the point that 2001 Allen Iverson was quote overrated due to his lower percentages and overstated impact, then that theoretically should have revealed itself when his team played without him. Well, that wasn't the case. Iverson's 76ers had a 56-26 record that season and made it all the way to the NBA Finals. But in the 12 games that Iverson didn't play that year, his team was only 6-6. And in those contests, they were only averaging 87.5 points per game, meaning that they were the worst offense in the entire league that season when Iverson did not play. So yeah, a number 1 seed and an NBA Finals appearance with Iverson, and a 500 record and the league's worst offense without Iverson. Try calling that overrated. Now let me make this clear. Allen Iverson did not carry this team all by himself, because one of the aspects of this squad that never gets enough credit is their defense. Starting the year at the center position was the 6'10 rim protector Theo Ratliff, who led the NBA in blocked shots that season at a monstrous 3.7. After just 50 games into that regular season, he was traded away for another all-time great rim protector in Dikembe Mutombo, who did go on to win the Defensive Player of the Year award that season. Their shooting guard, Aaron McKie, finished in the top 20 in defensive plus-minus. And yes, even Allen Iverson deserves some credit for this defense, as he may have not been the greatest on-ball defender, but he was great in the passing lanes and did lead the league in steals per game that season, averaging an impressive 2.5 per game. Make no mistake, they were a top 5 defense in 2001, and that was an accomplishment by committee. But in terms of their offense, there's no question that Iverson did a lot of carrying for this squad that season. And without him, their hopes of making the playoffs would have been bleak, let alone the NBA Finals and snapping the streak of one of the greatest undefeated juggernauts in playoff history. I truly believe that when anyone calls Allen Iverson overrated, it's just a perfect example of someone who places too much of their logic in surface level stats and box scores, rather than putting their trust in basketball's most important aspect for evaluation: the eye test. Once upon a time, on June 15th, 2003, Tim Theodore Duncan played one of the greatest games ever seen in the history of basketball. But what if I told you that if his stats from this performance had been tracked correctly, then this game from the Big Fundamental could be widely seen today as the greatest single performance in NBA Finals history? So here's what you really need to know. Duncan was dominating the New Jersey Nets in the 2003 NBA Finals in such a way that we had never seen a power forward dominate on the game's biggest stage. Over the course of the 6-game series, Duncan averaged an absolutely absurd 24.2 points, 17 rebounds, 5.3 assists, 1 steal, and 5.3 blocks on 49.5% shooting, which is obviously one of the most jaw-dropping stat lines in playoff history. But the championship-clinching 6th game was the real cherry on top. The Spurs won the game 88-77, and in that contest, Duncan had a mesmerizing stat line of 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks on 47.4% shooting. Now already on surface level, it's clear that this performance has an argument for being the greatest performance in playoff history, let alone finals history. But it was very close to being even more special than just that. With his 8 blocks, Duncan was only a total of 2 block shots away from the illustrious quadruple-double. Since blocks and steals began being tracked in 1973, there have been a total of 4 quadruple-doubles in NBA history. 1 was by Nate Thurmond, 1 was by Alvin Robertson, 1 by Hakeem Olajuwon, and 1 by David Robinson. The thing is, every single one of these quadruple-doubles happened in a regular season game, meaning that there has never, ever been a quadruple-double performance in the NBA playoffs. But what if I told you that there should have been? According to an endless amount of videos and articles online, the common belief on the internet seems to be that Tim Duncan should have been credited with a quadruple-double in his championship-clinching performance. Essentially, it comes down to these 8 blocked shots. The story is that the game's statistician incorrectly tracked Duncan's blocks, and should have given him an additional 2 blocks, thus giving Timmy the quadruple-double. Now here's the thing. This isn't like some mythical performance from Wilt Chamberlain where we have no footage of his amazing game and are left to speculate about the truth of the matter. But rather, we have the entire performance from Duncan on film. So theoretically, it shouldn't be hard to get a definitive answer on the situation. Let's start by looking at his 8 verified blocked shots. These are them being displayed on your screen now. So I think we can all agree that these confirmed blocks look pretty legit. But now is where things get really interesting. Because now we're looking at the plays that allegedly should have been counted as blocks as well for Tim Duncan. The first was midway into the third quarter. Kerry Kittles is attacking the basket, and after receiving contact, Kittles releases the ball before it was deflected out of bounds by Tim Duncan. Just to be clear, there was no foul called on this play. Now, according to the NBA, this did not count as a blocked shot for anyone on the court because this was not registered as a shot attempt for Kerry Kittles, meaning that Duncan's deflection was just that, a deflection and not a blocked shot. This seems like complete and utter nonsense to me though, because if Kittles wasn't shooting the basketball, then what was he doing? If you ask me, it was clear that Kittles was shooting the ball because he had just received contact and launched the ball at an upwards angle towards the rim, as if he was trying to earn a trip to the free throw line. What's amazing is that even ABC's commentators agreed with me during the play, including the legendary big man Bill Walton, who knows a thing or two about blocked shots.
I don't know if that was considered a shot attempt, but it's Duncan that knocked it out of there.
That's absolutely a block shot.
Then he's got 6 in my book.
So now I think we can all agree that Tim Duncan legitimately deserved at least 9 blocked shots. But now let's look at the alleged 10th block, which is what he needed for the quadruple double. This one happened with just under 5 minutes left in the third quarter. Richard Jefferson gets the basketball at the top of the key. He drives the lane and then drops a bounce pass to Kenyon Martin, who goes up for the shot, which is then blocked by either David Robinson or Tim Duncan. Now it's hard to tell definitively, but based on this footage, it looks like Tim Duncan gets to it first and gets his hand over the top of the basketball. I'll zoom in, slow it down, and give you time to look at it for yourself. Based on this specific highlight, from this specific angle, many YouTubers have claimed that this was clearly a blocked shot by Tim Duncan, and he should have been credited with the stat instead of Robinson. But I don't think it's that simple, because what most people don't realize is that there's actually another available angle on this shot. Usually, the NBA puts out an annual movie/documentary based on the season of the championship winner. This is the one from 2003 dedicated to the San Antonio Spurs title run. And on this one, which I have watched in its entirety, there is actually baseline footage of this play. Take a look. Now on this one, it is pretty clear that Duncan got to Kenyon Martin first. But although Duncan may have got a piece of the basketball, Martin did not release the shot just yet. But instead, he regathered it before he eventually releases it where it's sent back by seemingly David Robinson. From this angle, I can't possibly see how this block could have been Duncan's, as the follow-through of his arm is going in the exact opposite direction of where the ball is sent flying. So from a physics standpoint, it only makes sense that David Robinson was actually the one who blocked this shot. So at the end of the day, as much as it pains me to say it, I do think he fell just short of the quadruple double, even if his stats had been accurately calculated. Yes, the statistician was wrong, but instead of his stat line being 21, 20, 10, and 8, it should have been 21, 20, 10, and 9. In actuality, since blocks and steals have been tracked, there has still never been a player in NBA history who's achieved a quadruple-double in the NBA playoffs. But at the end of the day, does it really matter? Even without that quadruple-double accomplishment on his resume, there is still no question that this was one of the select few greatest performances of all time. and quite possibly the greatest performance that the league has ever seen in a championship-clinching game.
Real quick, toughest player for you to guard and the person you hated that guarded you the most?
Toughest players for me to guard, I always go with guys like Ray Allen, Rip Hamilton.
They move.
I hated that. I'm a shot blocker too, so I like weak side. I like knowing, watching the ball, go for steals. Gone. I hated guarding those dudes, especially Rip because he had them nails too.
He was dirty as.
Yes.
Grabbing, elbowing, doing all that.
Man, Rip got into a lot of times, boy. I'll tell you, Rip put them nails in you to start the game. You like, Rip, this is the tip. The ball just tipped.
The NBA's history is incredibly rich with talented players who've become overlooked over time, but this guy is certainly one of the strongest examples of that. Richard Clay Hamilton was a 6'7" shooting guard / small forward who was fundamentally sound and very precise with his game. He wasn't a high flyer or a particularly flashy player by any means, but he was the kind of hooper that would give opposing players nightmares, and defenses always had to pay attention to his whereabouts, otherwise they'd be punished greatly for it. In the year 1999, Rip was drafted out of UConn with the 7th overall pick by the Washington Wizards, and although this isn't the chapter of his career that he's most famous for, it's definitely one where he had an underappreciated impact. His career got off to a modest start as he was coming off of the bench for the vast majority of the season, as he was only playing about 19 minutes per game, which translated to an average of 9 points per night. His game and confidence would grow tremendously in the next couple of seasons though, as he doubled his scoring average to 18 in his second season. But unfortunately, that Wizards team had the league's worst defense overall, and finished with an abysmal 19-63 record. The roster was in need of some major changes, and they would make one in the offseason, like bringing in the greatest player of all time. A 38-year-old Michael Jordan stepped down from his executive office to play alongside of this team. And although it's not one of the more famous tandems of basketball lore, an older Michael Jordan and a third-year Richard Hamilton were actually quite the formidable duo. Initial chemistry issues were evident, as the Wizards got off to a slow 2-9 start, but shortly thereafter they would begin to hit their stride, as they won 9 straight games, taking their record to 14-12. Michael Jordan, Richard Hamilton, and the rest of the roster were actually getting better as the season progressed, but Hamilton then injured his groin, causing him to miss 5 weeks. When he eventually returned, their strong momentum continued, as the Wizards had a 15-1 stretch when Jordan and Hamilton were active on the roster together. Over that 16-game stretch, the Wizards also had the best defense in the entire league, as they were making a push for a top seed in the Eastern Conference. But unfortunately, on February 7th, Michael Jordan tore his meniscus, which eventually resulted in him being shut down for the season. In that third season, Hamilton averaged a new career high 20 points per game on 44% shooting and 38% from three-point distance. The tandem of Jordan and Hamilton may have not been on the level of Jordan and Pippen, but when they were healthy, they were excellent to say the least. Unfortunately for Washington, their management made a grave mistake and ruined their chemistry when they traded away Richard Hamilton to the much younger Detroit Pistons in exchange for Jerry Stackhouse. Now in the Motor City, the 24-year-old star would have even more room to operate, as he naturally became one of the cornerstone pieces of their offense. Now his skills were really able to shine, as Hamilton showed off his incredible basketball IQ and his tremendous stamina. Similar to NBA legends like Reggie Miller and Steph Curry, Hamilton never stopped moving. He was quite possibly more aggressive without the basketball than he was with it, as he covered so much ground as he took full advantage of every screen and every favorable angle. When he got to his ideal spot, he was nearly automatic, as he was equipped with one of the smoothest and one of the most lethal mid-range jumpers in the entire league. He immediately became the Pistons' leading scorer, averaging 19.7 points per game while playing all 82 games that season. This was also around the point where something rather significant would happen in his career. Between 2002 and 2004, Richard Hamilton would break his nose on 3 separate occasions. Due to this, he would regularly have to play games with a protective mask on. Over time, he became very comfortable with the mask, to the point that he preferred playing with it on rather than off. Even after his face had healed, Hamilton continued to wear the mask, as it basically became his signature accessory. When he was asked about the mask, he often referred to it as his quote, Superman cape. The Pistons certainly had no issues with it, as he continued to excel on the court. Now we enter the 03-04 season, which the Pistons are famous for, as they were arguably the greatest defensive team in NBA history. Richard Hamilton was once again the leading scorer of this group throughout the season, and it makes you wonder if there's ever been an NBA champion who's been more overlooked for his contributions to that title, despite being the team's leading scorer. Even in the NBA Finals against the super team Lakers, he led the team in scoring, regardless of the fact that Chauncey Billups was the one who won the Finals MVP. Despite this being the best the Pistons ever were as a team, Hamilton was just starting to enter the prime of his career individually, as he would earn an All-Star selection for the next 3 years straight, and would reach career highs in efficiency in 2006. For both field goal percentage and three-point percentage. He even received some Defensive Player of the Year consideration in 2008. Unfortunately, the Pistons' contending roster would begin to deteriorate, as the front office would make some questionable trades, while some of the proven veterans began to take contracts elsewhere. Hamilton continued to have a strong impact, but the roster strength overall wasn't what it used to be. Then in the late 2000s, Richard started to experience injuries that were far more significant than the ones to his nose, as he needed surgery on his feet, and by the age of 35, he was ready to hang it up for good. Since calling it quits, he's been honored by the Detroit Pistons, with his 32 jersey being retired. To a certain extent, I understand why hardly anyone talks about this guy anymore. He wasn't a clear-cut superstar, and as far as the 2004 championship team, well, there's a lot of guys who deserve credit for their success. Also consider the fact that Hamilton isn't the stereotypical kind of player that you would want to drop in this modern era. Sure, he was fantastic off-ball, but he mostly lived and thrived in the mid-range. And although he shot some three-pointers, they were few and far between. Regardless, one fan base that will never ever forget him is the Detroit faithful, as this star was a massive component of their championship identity, and they almost certainly couldn't have done it without him. So what do you guys think? Is Richard Hamilton celebrated enough? And is there anyone with a cooler signature accessory than the man in the mask?
Listen, Kobe, like I said, this entire time, he's our Michael Jordan for my generation. He's one of the best to ever lace him up, and it's been a pleasure and an honor to compete against him basically almost my entire career.
We all know about the Black Mamba. He was quite simply one of the greatest scorers in NBA history, and if you ask me, I believe he was the most explosive perimeter scorer of all time. When the Mamba got hot, it seemed like anything was possible. Obviously, we all know about his incredible 81-point performance against the Toronto Raptors on January 22, 2006. But I would argue that he had an even more impressive performance just 1 month earlier. You guys all know the game I'm talking about, but I honestly think that most of you don't grasp how remarkable it truly was. On December 20th, 2005, Kobe Bryant dropped 62 points on the Dallas Mavericks in a 112-90 victory. This wasn't just one of the greatest performances in NBA history, but it could have been the greatest performance the game of basketball has ever seen. That might sound crazy to some of you, but once you hear the context, I think it will make a lot of sense. You see, Kobe scored 62 points on 58% shooting in just 3 quarters of play. Now there have been other great scoring performances through 3 quarters. where the player didn't even play in the fourth, like Klay Thompson in 2016, where he scores 60 points in only 3 quarters against the Indiana Pacers. Or how about James Harden in 2019, where he scored 60 points in 3 quarters against the Atlanta Hawks? The thing that separates Kobe's performance, though, was the fact that he outscored the entire Dallas Mavericks team through 3 quarters of play, 62-61. When James Harden and Klay Thompson got their 60, they were nowhere close to outscoring the opposing team through 3 quarters. Phil Jackson gave Kobe the option of remaining in the game to play in the 4th quarter and set some scoring records. But the Mamba passed it up because his Lakers were up by 34 points, and he was content with the victory at hand. But if Kobe had stayed in the game, then he would have had the opportunity to do something that's never been done before in the history of the NBA, which is outscore an entire opposing team over the course of a game. When Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points in a single game, he wasn't even close to outscoring the opposing team, as the Knicks finished with 147 points. When Wilt dropped 78 points, the opposing team had 151. In Michael Jordan's career-high game of 69 points, the Cleveland Cavaliers had 113. When Luka Doncic scored 73 in 2023, the Hawks finished with 143. Even when you're looking at the highest scoring performances in NBA history, no one has ever been close to outscoring the opposing team over the course of a full game. Also consider this. One of the main reasons why other greats were never close to outscoring an opposing team is because almost all of them played in an offensively inflated era. But that wasn't the case for Kobe in the 05-06 season. That year, teams were averaging only 97 points per game. Since 1960, that is the 9th lowest scoring season in NBA history. By all conventional wisdom, Kobe was not supposed to drop 62 points in 3 quarters in that era, let alone outscore an entire team. The closest a player has ever got to accomplishing that was on November 22, 1950, when George Mikan scored 15 points and the opposing Pistons finished with 19. This low-scoring contest happened because the Pistons wanted to slow the game to a snail's pace in order to increase their chances at defeating the Lakers, who had the best player in the world. As you can imagine, the fans were outraged by this incredibly boring contest. So now, this game is famously remembered as the game that inspired the creation of the shot clock. So outside of that incredibly weird and specific circumstance, no player has ever been close to outscoring an opposing team, and Kobe had done that through 3 quarters with a legitimate chance at accomplishing the feat if he had remained in the game. One thing about Kobe is whenever he had an all-time great scoring game, his production would almost always increase as it got later into the contest. In the 81-point game against the Raptors, he scored 28 points in the 4th quarter alone. In the 62-point game against the Mavericks, he scored 30 points in the 3rd quarter alone. When Kobe scored 52 points against the Jazz in just 3 quarters, 30 of those points came in the 3rd quarter alone. It is very possible that the Mamba could have scored as many points as he needed to in order to outscore the Mavericks in the 4th quarter as well, especially considering how the Mavericks were deflated at that point and had nothing to aspire towards. Then you have to consider the strength of the competition. It would arguably be the greatest performance ever if Kobe outscored any single team in the 05-06 season. But the fact that it was against the Dallas Mavericks makes it a level of excellence that is difficult to even fathom. This Mavericks team was 7th in the league that season in points allowed. Beyond that, they made it all the way to the NBA Finals that year. Kobe wasn't taking advantage of some lottery-bound franchise, but he was legitimately torching one of the select few best teams in the entire league. He potentially could have produced more points single-handedly than the Western Conference champions. Let that sink in. Kobe didn't just pass up an opportunity at a 90-point game in the dead ball era, but he relinquished his chance at the greatest scoring accomplishment in pro basketball history, which is outscoring an entire team by himself.
Steve and Stephon Marbury gave me the most problems. Gave me the most problems. I love Stephon Marbury.
Yeah, big bro.
Yeah, Steve was just a headache because he could do it. He could do it all
Without being fast.
Didn't have John Stockton mode. You know what I mean? Just
Smart.
right here, just
smart.
You know what I mean? Just know how to get it done. You know what I mean? Steve was excellent, man.
The 6'3" point guard was drafted with the 15th overall pick in the 1996 NBA draft by the Phoenix Suns. There wasn't a tremendous amount of hype surrounding him upon entering the league, as some described him as a poor man's John Stockton. Another reason for his lack of hype was because he was somewhat overshadowed by the overall talent in the 1996 NBA draft, which has a legitimate argument for the claim of the greatest draft class of league history. Nash was going to have to prove himself in order to earn his minutes, a task that would be difficult considering how he spent his first 2 seasons in Phoenix behind great established point guards like Kevin Johnson, Sam Cassell, and Jason Kidd. In his first 2 seasons, he only managed to put up very modest numbers in his few minutes. It wasn't until the summer after the completion of his second season that the Dallas organization recognized his potential and traded for the 24-year-old guard. Nash immediately became a starter for the Mavericks, but his game was still developing slowly to go along with the fact that he was dealing with injuries over the next 2 seasons. It wasn't until his 3rd season with Dallas that Nash began to break out as a premier point guard, as he put up around 15 points and 7 assists on 48.7% shooting. He was decently close to his first 50-40-90 season, something that would go on to become a theme of his career. With his solid form and with his high-arcing jumper, he established himself as one of the most reliable and efficient shooters of the game. Over the next several seasons, his game would slightly improve in Dallas, and with the help of Dirk Nowitzki and Michael Finley, the Big Three Mavericks were consistently making noise in the Western Conference playoffs, making it as far as the West Finals in 2003, where they were eventually eliminated by Tim Duncan's Spurs. Heading into the summer of 2004, Nash had put up solid numbers in his recent years with Dallas, but he wasn't quite in the conversation yet of the best point guards of the entire league. Nash was also 30 years old and entering free agency. Typically, an NBA player's best years are behind him by the time he's reached his 30s, and Mavericks owner Mark Cuban had already committed to pay a significant salary to players like Anton Jamison, Michael Finley, Antoine Walker, and Dirk Nowitzki. Cuban offered Nash a 4-year deal that would pay him $9 million per year, but Phoenix offered him a 6-year deal for $63 million, which Cuban was not willing to match. So it was back to the Phoenix Suns for Nash, who were just coming off of a 29-53 season. This is where the star point guard's career would completely take off, as it was the perfect setting for his skill set and style. The new head coach of the Phoenix Suns was Mike D'Antoni, who loved to play a high-scoring and up-tempo style, which highly emphasizes perimeter shooting. Under D'Antoni, Nash and the Suns became famous for their 7-second offense, where the goal was to take each shot attempt within the first 7 seconds of gaining possession. Transition basketball is where Nash excels, as his ability to make quick decisions significantly improved his assists per game within this offense. With supporting talent like Joe Johnson, Sean Marion, and Amari Stoudemire, Nash led Phoenix to a league-best 62-20 record, which was a 33-win improvement over the previous season. On the year, Nash put up 15.5 points and a league-leading 11.5 assists on remarkable all-around efficiency. With Nash being Phoenix's only major acquisition, he improved the team from the bottom half of the league offensively to the best in the entire league. This impactful performance earned him the 2005 League MVP award. He continued his terrific play all the way into the Western Conference Finals, where they were eventually eliminated by the defensively superior San Antonio Spurs. The following season, Suns star Amari Stoudemire was lost for the season due to a knee injury, and shooting guard Joe Johnson had been traded away in the offseason. So the shorthanded Suns were not expected to be anywhere close to contenders, but that's when Nash showed his ability to make his teammates better, and actually improved upon his MVP numbers from the previous season, as he led his Phoenix Suns to an improbable 54-28 record. He also did it while achieving a 50-40-90 season, which only 8 other players have done in NBA history. More on that later. Thanks to his incredible play, and thanks to the way he led his team to exceed expectations in a tough Western Conference, Nash was named the league's MVP for the second straight season. Somehow, Nash once again pushed his Suns all the way to the Western Conference Finals, where they eventually lost in 6 games to the Dallas Mavericks. But this wouldn't be the last time that Nash would lead his team to be serious contenders. After another impressive regular season and a near 3rd straight MVP award, Nash led his Suns into the postseason with a 61-21 record, and waiting for them in the West semifinals was their rival, the San Antonio Spurs. This series is still considered as one of the great what-ifs of NBA history. Nash was having a great series, and the Suns won the 4th game, which tied the series at 2 games apiece. But unfortunately, it came at a major cost. Late in the 4th game, in a one-possession situation, Robert Horry gives Nash a very hard hip check, which results in an altercation between Raja Bell and Horry, and several players leave the bench. But the altercation between Bell and Horry is not the part that potentially changed the course of the series. Due to the league office being a bit paranoid shortly after the Malice at the Palace, the league had extremely harsh punishments for any players who left the bench during an altercation. Among those players in this specific situation were key members of the Suns roster in Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw. For this simple move towards center court, both players were suspended from the crucial 5th game in Phoenix, a game that San Antonio would win, and they would eventually win the series and the championship as well. If these silly suspensions never took place, then Steve Nash may have a championship ring on his resume, but unfortunately, that championship would never come. He's also among the most efficient players the game has ever seen. He has the 2nd greatest free throw percentage in league history behind only Steph Curry at 90.4%. He also had 4 seasons with 50-40-90 percentages, which is twice as much as the nearest competitor of league history, which is Larry Bird. But wait, it gets even more impressive. Not only does Nash hold the record with 4 50-40-90 seasons, but from the 02-03 season through the 2012-2013 season, Nash averaged 50-40-90 percentages. That means for an entire decade, Nash did what only a handful of players have done for just a single season. It's not like he was a completely perfect player though. Among Nash's weaknesses was his defense, as he was a little too slow with his lateral movement to keep up with the quicker point guards in the league, especially during his days with Phoenix and beyond. With that being said, he's one of those players who would have loved to have played in the modern NBA with all the transition basketball and 3-point shooting. Since his retirement, Nash has since stated that he wished he had shot more 3-pointers during his playing days, and he certainly could have. One of his listed weaknesses on the day he was drafted was the fact that he's a bit too selective with his shots, and that trend continued throughout his NBA career, which played a large part in why he had such incredible efficiency percentages. All in all, Nash is one of the great point guards of league history, and in my opinion, from a team impact standpoint, he certainly earned his 2 MVP awards. One of the most interesting player arcs in basketball is when a guy experiences his prime well before the typical age of a peaking player. Guys like Blake Griffin, Tyreek Evans, and Dwight Howard experienced the prime of their careers in their early 20s rather than their late 20s. Because of this, some younger fans may have never been aware just how excellent that player actually was during his prime. My favorite example of this is without a doubt Chris Paul. This eventual Hall of Famer is about to enter his 21st season in the NBA. If you ask me, his prime was definitely around 2008 to 2009, when he was a member of the New Orleans Hornets. So think about it. Even though this guy is an active player today, unless you're at least 28 years old, you never really witnessed a prime Chris Paul performing at a high level on a nightly basis. And as someone who did, let me tell you, this guy was different. Chris Paul in his early 20s had me convinced that he would end up as one of the greatest players of all time. We all know Chris Paul today as a savvy veteran with an extremely high basketball IQ. But back then, he still had that, but it was mixed with amazing athleticism, quickness, and speed. He was mesmerizing, both offensively and defensively. During that era, as a Lakers fan, we always struggled at defending elite point guards. So every time we played against him, I knew CP3 was about to put up a monstrous stat line. In the 2007 to 2008 season alone, the Hornets played against Kobe and the Lakers 4 times. In their first matchup, he dropped 19 points, 21 assists, and 3 steals. In their second matchup, he had 32 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds. In their third matchup, he had 27 points, 17 assists, and 4 steals. And in their final matchup of the season, he had 15 points, 17 assists, 6 rebounds, and 4 steals. Maybe now, you guys are starting to see why I thought CP3 was going to win the MVP that year instead of Kobe Bryant. In that season alone, he had 21 games with at least 15 assists, and 10 games with at least 5 steals. He was doing things that I didn't even know was possible in that era of basketball. And remember, he was doing all of this at 22 years old. One of his best nights was in a 2-point victory over Steve Nash and the Phoenix Suns, where he dropped 42 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, and 8 steals, while making 55% of his shots. Think about this for a second. A 22-year-old went into Phoenix and outperformed a recent 2-time MVP winner with one of the most impressive stat lines that we've ever seen from the point guard position. We were all stunned by the thought of what he could become, because considering his age, it was completely fair to assume that he was only getting better from here on out. If you had asked me in 2008 to make a prediction about Chris Paul, I probably would have told you that the GOAT debate for the point guard position would eventually be between him and Magic Johnson specifically. On top of all of this, CP3 was clutch. There was no injury history at this time, no evidence of him choking in the playoffs or anything like that. He had the stats, he had the playmaking, he had the defensive tenacity, and we all saw him as a killer, who could potentially have multiple championship trophies in his future. Now, he basically maintained that same level of production in the 2008 to 2009 season, and was quickly establishing himself as a big game performer, as he was seemingly always having his best performances against other Western Conference contenders. In a victory against the Mavericks, he had 31 points, 17 assists, 9 rebounds, and 2 steals, on a remarkable 73% shooting from the field. In a matchup with the Lakers, he had 21 points, 16 assists, 5 rebounds, and 4 steals on 50% shooting. In a victory against OKC, he poured in 29 points, 16 assists, 10 rebounds, and 3 steals on 65% shooting. Then again, against the Suns, he dropped 29 points, 16 assists, and 7 rebounds on 45%. Within a span of 2 weeks, he came dangerously close to achieving the historic quadruple-double, twice. Against the Mavericks on January 12th, he had 33 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds, and 7 steals on 50% shooting. And then, 12 days later, against the 76ers, he had 27 points, 15 assists, 10 rebounds, and 7 steals on 54% shooting from the field. I say this with complete conviction. We never saw a better version of Chris Paul than what we witnessed at the age of 22 and 23. Now, some speculate why that's the case, and might suggest that he didn't have the greatest conditioning or work ethic, but I really don't agree with that idea. Personally, I think it might have to do with the fact that he tore his meniscus in February of 2010. His recovery time was during the 2010 All-Star break, and this is what some of the game's greatest stars had to say about him in his absence.
He just doesn't have any weaknesses, man. I mean, he's tough, he's hard-nosed. He's a modern-day Isaiah Thomas.
He's everything, a coach dreams, because he can, not only play, but he can lead a team. He's a coach out there on the floor.
He's, for me, the best point guard in the game. His ability to score so effectively and obviously set people up is amazing.
He's just got the heart of a champion. He just doesn't back down from anything. You can say he has a small man's complex, because he just has a chip on his shoulder.
He's a winner, so he's got all the attributes, and he's going to have a phenomenal career.
Now get this, the Hornets were in the midst of a playoff rush when he tore his ligament. So because of this, they kind of rushed CP3 back into action after a small rehab process.
Tough, really tough, because I love to play all day, every day anyway, so as soon as possible. Doc said 4 to 6 weeks, so I'm just trying to do my rehab as much as possible.
Hornets fans feel they deserve their man back soon. Chris Paul hopes to oblige sooner than later.
In total, he missed just about 6 weeks of playing time before he was back out there on the court. Now, these were his averages that season before the injury, and these were his averages that season after he returned from injury. As you can see, it was a night and day difference. I think this torn ligament in his knee and the rush to get him back out there on the court actually ruined much of his speed, quickness, and explosiveness. Based on what I saw, Chris Paul always seemed like a slower version of himself after the injury, and at the very least, the numbers seem to back this up. These were his averages at the age of 23 in the 2008 to 2009 season, which was his last full season before the injury. After Paul returned to the court, he would play at least 16 more seasons in the NBA, yet he would never again be a 20 points per game scorer. He would never again average at least 11 assists per game. He would never again average more than 2.5 steals. And he would never shoot at least 50% from the field over the course of a season. Sure, he was still elite, but he would never return to that mesmerizing GOAT point guard trajectory that he had in his early 20s. To put it simply, if you didn't see Chris Paul in his early years, then you never got to experience the real CP3. Anyone who's been an NBA fan for a long time has several shots they can look back on and say, man, I wish that shot went in. Maybe it involved your favorite team, your favorite player, or it just would have made a really sick highlight. Regardless, I know you've got them and I've got them in the back of our minds. Today, I'm talking about the shot that I wished had gone in. And please, let me know in the comments section below what are some of your choices. Now this is the one that cuts the deepest for me personally. It's Robert Horry's missed three-pointer in Game 5 of the 2003 Western Conference Semifinals. The context is key in this scenario. The Lakers had just won 3 straight NBA championships and were trying to accomplish something that even Michael Jordan's Bulls had never done, which was win a 4th straight NBA title. Lakers fans really wanted to win it this year specifically, because this is the year that we had lost our longtime local commentator, Chick Hearn, who in a way was the voice of the organization. Even Kobe himself echoed this sentiment after they just eliminated the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round.
Yeah, Kobe, it seems like every year that I'm thinking back at championships prior to you guys, not even just the Lakers, there's one incident that sparks you and says, it gets that fiery lit when you're trying to go back to back or you're trying to be three-peat, What's that spark this year that make you say, you know what, I'm not complacent?
History. This is our chance to make history. And we obviously want to win it for Chick Hearn. We haven't forgot about him at all. Making history and winning one for Chick, that's those are big motivating factors for us.
Now, in the last few playoff runs, Robert Horry had made clutch game-winning baskets to seal away pivotal victories for Los Angeles. At this point, he was doing it so regularly that it was basically expected by all of his teammates. Now, Game 5 was in San Antonio. The series was tied at 2 games apiece. This was a crucial game, but the Lakers were trailing by as many as 25 points, and the deficit was 17 points with less than 8 minutes left in the 4th quarter. But that's when Kobe Bryant absolutely erupted and took over the game just when his team needed it. In my opinion, this was the year where Kobe had finally surpassed Shaquille O'Neal as the best player on the team. And in this instance, he was proving it on the court. Some of the shots he was hitting were insane, even by his standards. Unfortunately, he wouldn't get the last laugh, because on the Lakers' final possession, they were down by 2 points. Kobe successfully draws the double team, and finds the one guy open that San Antonio would have to be crazy to leave open. Of course, it's Robert Horry. He catches the pass and the shot is in and out. It was about as close to going down as it possibly could have been. Due to this miss, the Spurs won the game, as the Lakers were in utter shock. Since then, several Laker players have talked about how demoralizing this miss was. Some of them even said that they saw the miss as a sign that they were not meant to win the championship that year. When Game 6 happened, it was obvious that this was the case. as the Lakers lacked energy and belief. They were destroyed in their own building, 110-82. If Horry had made that shot, then the Lakers win Game 5, and this performance from Kobe is immortalized in basketball lore. The Lakers would have had their confidence intact, and likely win one of the 2 final games to advance. San Antonio was the best team that year, as they went on to win the championship. But if the Lakers had beaten them, then I believe they would have gone on to be the champions instead. Now think about this. In this scenario, Kobe finishes his career with 6 championship rings. 1 more than Magic Johnson, 1 more than Tim Duncan, and an equal amount to Michael Jordan. But instead, the Lakers were eliminated in an ugly fashion, while we had to watch Kobe Bryant and Derek Fisher crying on the sidelines. It was brutal. What made it all even worse was the fact that Big Shot Bob left the Lakers in the offseason and joined this Spurs team that he just failed to make the shot against. And then he went on to hit big playoff shots with them instead. It just added insult to injury. Now think about it. If that shot had went down in Game 5, then it definitely improves Kobe's legacy and Shaq's legacy while changing Lakers history and basketball history as a whole, as the Lakers would be the only team since the NBA merger to win 4 straight titles. As the saying goes, you win some and you lose some, but this one definitely stung more than most. As most basketball fans already know, Tracy McGrady was simply one of the most talented players to ever play the game. As Kobe Bryant once described him, he was a player who had all the skills and athleticism, but in a 6'9" frame. At his peak, he was averaging as high as 32 points per game, and he's famously known for his iconic comeback over the San Antonio Spurs, where he scored 13 points in only 35 seconds. As talented as McGrady was, his potential reached even higher. But unfortunately, his chronic back injuries disrupted his career and stunted his progression, making him one of the greatest what-ifs of basketball history. With that being said, we still got to witness McGrady perform at an elite level for roughly 7 seasons straight, and within that window, many stories and legacy-defining moments took place that much of the basketball community have since forgotten. Today, we're tackling the story of Tracy McGrady's career and evaluating the events that took place when his legacy was on the line. When McGrady entered the league, he was an 18-year-old kid straight out of high school who would take time to blossom into the superstar we know. T-Mac was only operating as a role player in his time in Toronto, while his cousin Vince Carter was operating as the franchise player and the talk of the town. In his last season as a member of the Raptors, McGrady made the NBA playoffs but was swept out of the first round in 3 games by the New York Knicks. Unfortunately, this early playoff exit would begin to become a theme of his career, a theme that would start to build a narrative about him as a player and about his legacy. In the summer of 2000, McGrady signed with the Orlando Magic, putting him in a position where he was now able to shine as the primary superstar of a team. McGrady was now averaging around 27 points per game and was proving himself to be one of the best perimeter players in the entire league. Orlando finished as a 7th seed heading into the playoffs, where they were matched up with a far more talented Milwaukee Bucks squad. It's also worth mentioning that Tracy's sidekick Grant Hill was out for the playoffs with yet another significant injury, which meant that T-Mac had to carry the team almost exclusively offensively. He put up ridiculously monstrous all-around numbers throughout the series, but ultimately it wasn't anywhere close to enough as the stacked Bucks closed out the Magic in 4 games. The following season was more of the same, as Grant Hill once again missed the entirety of the playoffs, while Tracy had to carry an Orlando squad that was pretty devoid of talent. This time, the Magic were eliminated in 4 games by the Charlotte Hornets, and McGrady once again put up insanely monstrous numbers. He consistently wasn't getting the help he needed, and as a result, this ended up being the 3rd straight season that T-Mac had been eliminated out of the first round of the playoffs. But it was in the next season where his reputation started to take some major hits. From an individual standpoint, McGrady's 02-03 season was likely the best of his career, as he put up his best regular season numbers yet. The thing is, Tracy was still missing a second star, as Grant Hill only played 29 games, which were all in the first half of the season. Orlando finished with a 42-40 record, which was good enough for only the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference and resulted in a matchup with the consistently contending Detroit Pistons. McGrady and the Magic were obviously massive underdogs in this series, and stunningly, they roared out of the gates and managed to get a 3-1 series lead over Detroit. Up to this point, Tracy looked like he was having one of the greatest playoff series in NBA history, as he dominated his way to these absurdly high and efficient numbers against arguably the best defensive team of that era. Unfortunately, the season wasn't yet over at that point, but that didn't stop McGrady from acting like it. In a controversial post-game interview, McGrady confidently stated, "It feels good to get into the second round," even though his Magic were only up 3-1. It was a classic example of pride coming before the fall, as the Pistons went on to crush the Magic in the next 3 games straight, winning by an average of 20.3 points. The series was a tale of two McGradys, as his last 3 games looked nothing like his first 4, as he was contained to extremely inefficient numbers by Detroit. Not only did McGrady's post-game comment age like milk, but it also started to appear like some self-induced curse, as he once again failed to get out of the first round, and the narrative was now firmly established that he was a superstar that just couldn't advance in the playoffs. What's probably worse than getting eliminated in the first round is not making the playoffs at all, which is what happened in the 03-04 season, as Orlando finished with the worst record in the Eastern Conference, despite McGrady winning his 2nd straight scoring title. At this point, Orlando's management had finally accepted the fact that they were a franchise that needed a rebuild, and traded McGrady to the Houston Rockets. T-Mac expressed his excitement to play with the new star big man Yao Ming. As a legitimate superstar duo, McGrady and Yao led the Rockets to a 51-31 record, and it appeared that McGrady might finally be in a solid position to advance beyond the first round. They were facing a solid Dallas Mavericks team whose Dirk Nowitzki was just reaching the prime of his career. T-Mac started off solid, as did his Rockets, as they stormed out to a 2-0 lead in the series. The Mavericks clawed their way back into it, and the series was heading to a deciding 7th game in Dallas. Although T-Mac had played incredible throughout the majority of the series and had put up his usual strong postseason numbers, he picked the wrong time and place to come out cold, as Tracy missed his first 7 shots of the 7th game. Houston could never find their groove, and the Mavericks completely demolished McGrady and the Rockets, winning the deciding game by a whopping 40 points. At this point in history, many basketball fans, including myself, were confused as to what to make of Tracy McGrady. On one hand, he appeared to be one of the greatest talents that the game of basketball had ever seen, and consistently produced tremendous postseason numbers. But on the other hand, for one reason or another, he just couldn't get past the first round of the playoffs, as he was now 0-5 in his first round appearances. In the following season, Houston was hit with a slew of injuries, including the first major one to Tracy McGrady, as it was the beginning of his devastating back injuries that would ultimately cut his career short. Due to this, the 05-06 Rockets missed the playoffs entirely, finishing with only a 34-48 record. The Rockets franchise was able to bounce back in the 06-07 season, as Yao Ming had a breakout year, asserting himself as Houston's #1 scoring option. T-Mac was still a legitimate weapon, but with his back issues still lingering, he saw a significant drop in his regular season production. With that being said, together, Yao and McGrady led the Rockets to a 52-30 record, good enough for the 5th seed in the West playoffs. Prior to the start of their first round series with Utah, McGrady was being interviewed by ESPN's own Stephen A. Smith. And in the interview, Stephen A. didn't waste any time acknowledging the elephant in the room, T-Mac's inability to lead his team past the first round up until this point. A confident yet agitated McGrady responded with this.
It's on me. If we don't get out of the first round, it's on me. Wait a minute. If we don't get out of the first round this year, it's on me.
It's pretty incredible to see such a bold statement from a superstar like McGrady. It's not often that athletes bet on themselves with such ownership and such a sense of responsibility. The pressure was immense, and almost everyone in the basketball world was waiting to see how it unfolded. Through the first 6 games, McGrady was getting his numbers, but he was doing it at a high volume of shots, as he wasn't shooting the ball very efficiently at all. Fortunately, he was actually getting help from a solid supporting cast, and as a result, the series was tied at 3 games apiece heading into the 7th and deciding game. The pressure for him had never been more intense than it was in this game, and under these extreme circumstances, McGrady produced, finishing Game 7 with 29 points, 13 assists, 5 rebounds, and 3 blocks on 48% shooting. Unfortunately, it still wasn't enough, as Utah Stars had individual performances for the ages. After this close defeat, McGrady had been eliminated from the first round in all 6 appearances of his career. A clearly emotional McGrady was trying hard to keep his composure in the press conference afterwards. But as soon as the questions started to come, T-Mac simply left without answering the question, saying emotionally, "This was beyond devastating. Not only was it yet another first-round defeat, but McGrady's team had a 2-game series lead in 2003, 2005, and 2007, and went on to lose each and every series." The following year, Houston would get a rematch with the Utah Jazz in the first round of the playoffs. But tragically, Yao Ming's season was shut down 2 months before the playoffs began due to a stress fracture in his left foot. This meant that a short-handed McGrady had to do his best to carry the offense for the Rockets. But ultimately, despite a pretty solid series performance, McGrady was eliminated for the 7th time from the first round as the Jazz comfortably closed it out in 6 games. From this point on, Tracy's career wouldn't be about his early playoff exits, but rather about his early regular season exits due to his severe back injuries. Over the next 4 seasons, McGrady's game declined to a role player's level of contribution, and he missed 139 regular season games, and wouldn't get another true taste of playoff basketball. Eventually, in 2013, he was signed by the San Antonio Spurs and was activated just in time for the playoffs. He only saw roughly 25 total garbage time minutes in that postseason, and never scored a single point, as he was only a shell of what he once was. But technically, it did at least allow him to play beyond the first round of the playoffs, since the Spurs went all the way to the NBA Finals that season, before eventually being eliminated in 7 games by the Big Three's Miami Heat. With that, he had played his final minutes of NBA basketball in only his early 30s. So as you can see, T-Mac had one of the most tragic and confusing legacies that the game has ever seen. Although legends like Kobe Bryant have praised him for being the most difficult player he's ever had to guard, T-Mac is also the star who couldn't advance in the playoffs no matter how many opportunities he was presented with. Paul Anthony Pierce, an NBA champion and one of the great Celtics of basketball history. A couple years ago, in a statement that probably still haunts him to this day, Pierce said that he was a better player than Dwayne Wade, and most of the basketball community roasted him for it. But is it really as ridiculous as it sounds? Paul has been known to make a lot of bold claims in his time as an analyst, and in my opinion, this one was far from the craziest. Today, we're taking a look at the career, talent, and legacy of the Boston Celtics legend, and we'll start as we always do, by taking it back to the beginning of his career. Pierce was selected with the 10th overall pick in the 1998 NBA draft by the Boston Celtics. The 6'7" small forward didn't waste any time making his imprint on the league. He wasn't the most athletically gifted player, but he had many skills on offense. As he was an elite perimeter shooter, he was a good finisher around the rim, and he had a solid step-back jumper in the days where most players weren't using it. In his rookie season, he averaged 16.5 points, 6.4 rebounds, 2.4 assists, and 1.7 steals on 43.9% shooting. He also shot 41.2% from three-point range, which was the 11th best efficiency in the entire league. This season-long performance earned him a spot on the NBA's All-Rookie team. Boston was a very young and inexperienced team at this point, so they only finished with a 19-31 record in that lockout-shortened season. But their fortunes would soon turn around, right around the same time that Pierce would break out as a legitimate superstar. But not before he would experience one of the worst evenings of his life that would derail many individuals. On September 25th of the year 2000, at a Boston nightclub, 3 stupid and jealous individuals stabbed Paul Pierce 11 times in his face, his neck, and his back, and left him to die in a pool of his own blood. Fortunately, his teammate Tony Battie put Pierce in his car and rushed him to the hospital. The doctors were able to save Paul's life, but he had to have surgery to repair his collapsed lung. One of the stab wounds was just an inch away from hitting Paul's heart. Everyone would understand Paul needing a significant amount of time to recover, not just physically, but even mentally, as Paul dealt with ongoing PTSD from that evening. Despite the healing process and that traumatic experience, Pierce was still ready at the start of the NBA regular season just roughly a month later. Not only that, but he played all 82 games in that season, proving himself to be one of the toughest players the league has ever seen. One of the signature performances from that season came on March 13, 2001, against the defending champion Lakers in Staples Center. He was pretty much unstoppable, scoring in a variety of ways regardless of who was defending him. He put up 42 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 steals on 68.4% shooting. After the game, Lakers center Shaquille O'Neal was asked in an interview about Pierce's performance, and Shaq said, "Write this down. Paul Pierce is the mother effing truth." Since that day, Pierce's most iconic nickname has simply been The Truth. The following season, Pierce would lead his Celtics to their first playoff berth in nearly a decade, and he did it with monstrous numbers of 26.1 points, 6.9 rebounds, 3.2 assists, and 1.9 steals on 44.2% shooting. He was third in the league in overall three-point attempts, and yet he still shot 40.4% from that distance. He also led the entire league in total points that season. The tandem of Pierce and Antoine Walker led the Celtics to a 49-33 record, and they made it through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs before losing to the New Jersey Nets in the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games. This is the closest Pierce would get to the NBA Finals before the Boston Big Three assembled later in his career. With that being said, this period was actually the strongest point of his career from an individual standpoint. After a disappointing 06-07 campaign in which he dealt with injuries, Boston shook the basketball world by trading for both Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett. Naturally, all 3 superstars including Pierce took a step back in terms of individual production, but it was worth it for the overall team success that they were experiencing. The Celtics went from being a 24-win team in 2007 to a 66-win team in 2008, which was the greatest team improvement in NBA history. Pierce led his entire team in scoring and was once again named an All-Star. As most of you know, he led the Celtics to win the NBA championship over the Lakers in 6 games, and he was named the Finals MVP with his iconic performance coming in Game 1 where he returned from injury to seal the victory for Boston. More on this performance in a bit. The Celtics only won 1 championship in the Big Three era, but if they had been healthy, there's a great chance they would have won as many as 3 championships, as Kevin Garnett's knee injury caused him to miss all of the 2009 playoffs, and Kendrick Perkins missed Game 7 in the NBA Finals in 2010, which was a game where his rebounding and his help with interior defense may have been a determining factor. Regardless, throughout his Celtics days, and even into his days with Brooklyn and Washington, Pierce remained one of the most reliable and clutch shooters that the league had to offer. He finished out his career in 2017 as a member of the Los Angeles Clippers. Looking at his career as a whole, Pierce was a 10-time All-Star, he made 4 All-NBA teams, he's an NBA champion, and was the 2008 Finals MVP. I really think Pierce was a lot better than most people realize, and a big part of that is because his prime years came before the Big Three Celtics were formed. So many people are either too young to have seen his early years in Boston, or they just weren't paying attention at that point. His self-comparison to Dwayne Wade is a losing one in my opinion. Pierce does have a point that Wade had a lot more help to win his championships, and the help came a little too late for Pierce to win as many championships as he could have. Wade certainly was the better defender, as he's one of the best shot-blocking guards in NBA history who made 3 all-defense teams, but Pierce was also a significantly better three-point shooter than Wade ever was, and they were comparable scorers throughout their careers. Again, I think the answer is clearly Wade, but the comparison certainly wasn't as bad as a lot of people make it seem. To be honest, I've never seen one player innocently do more damage to their legacy than Paul Pierce has done to his own in recent years. Calling himself better than Dwayne Wade immediately invited criticism, and then the fact that he confessed his injury in the 2008 Finals was really just a need for a bathroom break pretty much ruined the most iconic moment of his career. He later backtracked and said that he was joking, but unfortunately the damage to his legacy had already been done. Personally, I remember Paul Pierce as the truth, one of the most lethal scorers and dangerous shooters of his day. I remember him as the guy who didn't let 11 stab wounds stop him from playing out the NBA season and tearing up the rest of the league. Based on the perspective of the basketball community, he's extremely underrated. Based on Paul Pierce's view of himself in his own mind, he's extremely overrated. The Sacramento Kings of the early 2000s are widely seen as one of the greatest teams to never win a championship. And that's probably because they should have won a championship, as it is believed by many in the basketball community that they were screwed out of a championship opportunity in the 2002 Western Conference Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers. For obvious reasons, the talent, depth, and chemistry of that Kings team deserves to be honored and remembered as if they were past NBA champions. But the thing is, usually when people talk about that squad in the present day, they talk about stars like Chris Webber and Mike Bibby. But one member of that roster was equally impactful to those players, yet rarely gets any of the attention. His name is Peja Stoyakovich. This guy was a lethal offensive weapon who was way ahead of his time. He was terrifying on the perimeter, as arguably the most dangerous sniper of his era. People forget just how special and unique this athlete was, as he played the game like Ray Allen and Reggie Miller, but he was 6 foot 10 inches tall. As a Lakers fan who vividly remembers all of their playoff battles, I can tell you that we were terrified of this guy. Give him just a second of daylight and we were sure he was going to punish us for it. Now, Peja had a modest start to his NBA career, as he averaged 8 points per game in his rookie season and 11 points per game in his sophomore season. But in his third year, he was made a full-time starter, and this boost of confidence was exactly what his game needed, as he increased his scoring to 20 points per game on tremendous efficiency splits. He was always an off-ball threat, as he kept lurking, moving, and waiting for his opportunity to swing the momentum with a massive three-ball. With that being said, he had the handle and the ability to make a play for himself whenever he wanted to. This Sacramento squad was known for their beautiful ball movement and their team-first mindset, and Stoyakovich willingly sacrificed some of his own opportunities to blend into this system. But there's no doubt in my mind that if he had been in another situation during his prime years, then he could have filled up the stat sheet to an even greater extent than he did. It wasn't just his three-point shooting, but his shooting touch was pure all over the court, as he led the NBA in free throw percentage twice, and he has one of the greatest career free throw percentages in NBA history, at a stellar 90%. He wasn't just a key contributor for Sacramento, but he was one of their leading stars, as he was second on the team in scoring in both 2001 and 2002, trailing only Chris Webber. Now, what many people forget about their epic 7-game series with the Lakers in 2002 is the fact that Peja wasn't even healthy for it. He missed the first 4 games of that series due to an injury, and when he eventually returned for the final 3 games, it was clear that he wasn't himself, as he put up horrible numbers and horrible efficiency splits. The timing couldn't have possibly been any worse, as this was the best opportunity that this Kings team would ever have at winning a championship. Now, although the prime of this Kings group had come and gone, Peja was still yet to see his individual peak. During the 2003 to 2004 season, Stoyakovich would take his game to the next level. It was mostly out of necessity, as their leading superstar Chris Webber had to have microfracture knee surgery, resulting in Webber missing 59 out of the 82 regular season games. For the first time, stepping into the leading role was the perimeter assassin, Peja Stoyakovich, and it's a role he thrived in. He put up some career-high averages of 24.2 points, 6.3 rebounds, and 1.3 steals on absolutely deadly shooting splits. Against all of the odds, Peja led his Kings to a remarkable 55-27 record, good enough for the 4th seed in a stacked Western Conference. And as a result, Peja finished in 4th place in the MVP voting, which was ahead of young superstars like Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and LeBron James. Unfortunately, this was the very best that we would ever see from Peja, because his back and neck injuries would begin to limit his time and affect his productivity. After subtle declines from year to year, he eventually found himself in New Orleans with Chris Paul and David West. To a lesser degree, he was impactful for this Western Conference contender, who surprised many when they won 56 games in the 07 to 08 season, where Peja poured in 16 points per game, including an excellent 44% from three-point range. In terms of his skills and abilities, he had a lot left in the tank. But sadly, his body had something else in mind, as the back and neck issues took their toll. By the start of the 2010 to 2011 season, he was 33 years old and was just a shell of his former self. With that being said, he was in the right place at the right time, as he was a part of the 2011 Dallas Mavericks, who went all the way to the NBA Finals and who shockingly defeated the Big Three Miami Heat. Peja only scored a grand total of 2 points in those NBA Finals, but he was able to end his NBA career with a championship that he deserved in Sacramento. The fact that he had such a short career and played for small market teams resulted in him becoming an afterthought in the years since his retirement. And that's unfortunate, because the truth of the matter is that at his best, Peja Stoyakovich was one of the most dangerous and efficient perimeter players in the entire league. In total, he earned 3 All-Star selections and an All-NBA selection in 2004. He was also the NBA's three-point contest winner in back-to-back seasons in 2002 and in 2003. Given his size and skill set, there is zero doubt in my mind that Peja would have tore up this modern NBA, as the rules and style of play in this present game are basically tailor-made for his abilities. One thing I've noticed throughout my years of watching the NBA is that the offensive side of the court is disproportionately celebrated over the defensive end of the court, and I don't believe that any single player is a greater example of that than the all-time great defender Ben Wallace. But just how good was he really? In a perfect world, how much would he be celebrated? Today, I'll do my best to answer that, but in order to get a more thorough understanding of him, we'll start as we always do, by taking it back to the beginning of his career. The 6'9" Wallace attended college at Virginia Union University and actually went undrafted in the 1996 NBA draft. But within a matter of a few years, all 29 NBA teams would be regretting that decision. Wallace was eventually picked up by a mediocre Washington Bullets team, who was in need of some help in the painted area. In his rookie season, he hardly got any opportunities, as he only played 34 games and averaged about 6 minutes of action per game. Washington at least liked him enough to bring him back for a second and third season, and although he did see some progression, it remained slow going. By his third season with the team, he was averaging nearly 27 minutes per game, and although he was usually coming off the bench, he still managed to average about 6 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game on 58% shooting. After Washington had missed the playoffs for 3 straight seasons, management was ready to shake things up. So in August of 1999, he was traded to the Orlando Magic. He would start in all 81 games he played that season, but he actually played a fewer 24.2 minutes per game, and had somewhat similar numbers to the previous season. With some remaining limitations on him, Orlando finished with an underwhelming 41-41 record and missed the playoffs. Orlando then decided to make their own big changes. After signing Tracy McGrady to a massive contract, they decided to get him a co-star and traded for the 6'8" All-Star forward Grant Hill. It was this trade for Hill that sent Ben Wallace to the Detroit Pistons, where his legendary career would truly begin. At the time, people were considering this a one-sided trade in favor of the Magic, since McGrady and Hill were seen as a superstar duo who could compete for championships in the Eastern Conference. Well, that wasn't exactly the case, because not only did Hill go on to deal with consistent injuries, but Wallace went on to be much better than Orlando ever imagined. Although Detroit didn't have the overall talent to be a playoff contender just yet, Wallace was more than ready to assert himself as a terrific asset in the league. He started all 80 games he played in the regular season and averaged a career high up to that point 34.5 minutes per game. On the year, he averaged 6.4 points, 13.2 rebounds, 1.3 steals, and 2.3 blocks on 49% shooting. Immediately as a Piston, he established himself as one of the best rebounders and best defensive players in the entire league. With his remarkable strength and athleticism, he really was like a modern Bill Russell, in the sense that he was a team-first player who dominated the boards and the paint defensively. Yet he was not a great scorer by any means. Although he was now on the basketball map in a big way, it wasn't all positive. For example, that first season in Detroit, he shot a historically awful 33.6% from the free throw line. In fact, for his career, Wallace only shot 41.4%. That is literally the worst career free throw percentage in NBA history, and it's not even close. To emphasize just how bad that actually is, consider this. Shaquille O'Neal is basically famous for his horrific free throw shooting. Well, he could come out of retirement and shoot 3,000 more free throws and miss every single one of them, and he would still have a better career free throw percentage than Ben Wallace. Yes, Wallace was a master defensively, but you kind of need to be if you're gonna justify having a roster spot with that kind of foul shooting. In the following season, he would finally have some offensive support, and his Pistons started winning games. Along with that, Wallace led the entire league for the 01-02 season in rebounds per game and blocks per game. Thanks to this incredible effort, he was honored with an all-defensive selection, and he won his first Defensive Player of the Year award, which would soon become a regular occurrence in his career. Now imagine playing 80 games in a season, averaging a league-leading 13 rebounds and 3.5 blocks, winning the Defensive Player of the Year award while your team wins 50 games in the regular season, which was enough to earn the second seed, and you're still not selected as an NBA All-Star that year. If that doesn't tell you that defense isn't appreciated as much as offense, then I don't know what will. Now, in his third season in Detroit is when their incredible championship team finally started to take shape, as they acquired both Chauncey Billups and Richard Hamilton, giving Wallace the offensive support he needed for him to truly shine. For the second straight season, he led the league in rebounds, this time with a monstrous 15.4 per game, which was the highest league-leading average since Dennis Rodman in 1997. On top of that, Wallace averaged 3.2 blocks and 1.4 steals, which helped him win his second straight Defensive Player of the Year award. Finally, he was respected enough to be given an All-Star selection, which was the very first of his career. His Pistons went all the way to the 2003 Eastern Conference Finals before they were swept in 4 games by Jason Kidd and the New Jersey Nets. After acquiring the experienced veteran Rasheed Wallace, the all-time great Pistons were set for their epic run. The 2003-2004 season was supposed to be the year of the super team Lakers, led by Shaq, Kobe, Karl Malone, and Gary Payton. But Detroit had something else in mind. As the defensive anchor down low, Wallace set the tone for that team, and that squad went on to be arguably the greatest defensive team in the history of pro basketball. The amount of defensive records they broke in the regular season, and especially the postseason, was utterly astonishing, including the most times holding a team under 90 points, 85 points, 80 points, 75, 70, 65, and 60. They held teams to the lowest points per game average in playoff history, and they had the best defensive rating in playoff history as well. Honestly, I could probably make an entire video about the all-defensive records they broke that season, and the player who was most responsible for that defense was none other than Big Ben. The 2004 Lakers were good enough to be a championship team on most seasons, but this year they ran into the defensive juggernaut that was the Pistons. Although Shaquille O'Neal had a decent final series, averaging 26.6 points per game, that was still far less than what he usually produced in the finals, and the credit for that belonged mostly to Wallace, who was one of the few players in basketball history who was actually as strong as the Diesel, which meant that Shaq couldn't just bully him as much as he wanted to. Not only did the Pistons go on to win that championship series, but they did it in dominating fashion, closing out the super team Lakers in just 5 games. Obviously, this was the absolute pinnacle of Wallace's career, but he was far from done adding to his resume. In his next 2 seasons, he would win the Defensive Player of the Year award yet again, which meant that he won the award a whopping 4 times in just 5 years. His 4 DPOYs is tied for the most in NBA history, alongside of the great Dikembe Mutombo. After starting his career struggling to make the playoffs in few minutes of action, he went on to be a perennial winner with the Detroit Pistons, as he made the Eastern Conference Finals in 4 straight seasons, including 2 trips to the NBA Finals in 2004 and 2005. As his strength and athleticism started to deteriorate with age, so did his defensive impact. And because of that, he ended his career as somewhat of a journeyman, playing in Chicago, Cleveland, and eventually he made his return to Detroit, before eventually retiring at the age of 37. In total, he was a 4-time All-Star, but that was far fewer than what he actually deserved. He made 5 All-NBA teams, 6 All-Defense teams, was a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, a 2-time rebounds leader, a 1-time blocks leader, and the 2004 NBA champion. Although he was certainly the epitome of a free throw liability, he was also one of the select few greatest defensive players of all time. And honestly, I think he's one of the most underappreciated players of all time, considering how he only made 4 All-Star teams, and considering how long it took for him to go into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Around the time that Kobe retired, I remember many people calling him the last of a dying breed. That's because in today's modern NBA, guys don't play through injuries quite like they used to. Many superstar players spend their free time podcasting or streaming, while the Mamba regularly sacrificed sleep to get every additional moment in the gym that he possibly could. In today's era, it's difficult to get guys to give even 80% effort in an all-star game or even regular season games. And oftentimes, they're not even present in the first place, because they chose to, quote, load manage. Then there's Kobe Bryant. Even from the moment he came into the league as a teenager, he valued hard work, and had a level of competitiveness that none of his peers could match. At this point, we've all heard Kobe story after Kobe story, testifying about his commitment, dedication, and relentlessness. And today, I'm bringing you yet another example of that. But this one is basically never talked about. So let me give you the context. The date is October 20th, 2001. The Lakers are currently the defending back-to-back NBA champions. And to say that they were dominating the rest of the league would be a gargantuan understatement. The Lakers were coming off of an NBA championship run where they had won 23 out of their last 24 games, including a 15-1 postseason run, where they swept through an incredibly stacked Western Conference. This postseason performance put the 0-1 Lakers in the conversation of the greatest team in NBA history. So in a sense, they had nothing left to prove, because they had already proved it all. Anyone could look at this situation and expect the Lakers to have a championship hangover. After dominating the entire league with the greatest postseason run ever, it wouldn't be surprising to see them start the 0-1-02 season looking lethargic, content, and uninterested. And you would especially expect that to be the case in the NBA preseason, where the games are literally meaningless to a team's championship chances, and where the statistics and final scores are not even officially tracked, because of just how insignificant they are. So now that we know the context, let's bring our attention back to the game at hand. The Lakers were taking on their rivals, the Sacramento Kings, and it was just a preseason game 10 days before the season was set to officially begin. Although the Lakers were technically considered as the home team for this exhibition game, they were not actually playing in Staples Center, Los Angeles, but rather it was in Las Vegas, Nevada. In this type of situation, many star players wouldn't participate in this game at all, and if they did, they wouldn't be on the court during crunch time. But again, then there's Kobe Bryant. He had a decent start to the game as he was in rhythm and had about 10 points through the first half, in just a one-possession game. Into the third quarter, and Bryant is still playing with a tremendous amount of intensity, as he was scoring, distributing, and was extremely aggressive on the boards. Throughout the third and much of the fourth quarter, Kobe spent a lot of time on the bench, And that's when Sacramento's lead blossomed. It's now late in the fourth quarter and Shaq is done for the night. But Kobe finds himself still out there on the court, trailing by 15 points with just over 3 minutes left in this inconsequential ballgame. Kobe's solid defense helped force the turnover that led to his breakaway dunk. On the next possession, Kobe gets the rebound off the Kings' missed jumper, and then he takes it to the other end and buries a three, which cuts the lead down to 10. Sacramento then scores on the other end. And then, back on the Lakers' side, Kobe fakes out Doug Christie to create space for yet another three-point jumper. The Lakers fans in the crowd are loving it, as they are certainly getting more than what they paid for in this preseason matchup. A couple possessions later, there's a minute left in the fourth quarter. Lakers are down by 9 points, and Kobe is playing relentless full-court defense, trying to keep their hopes alive. He then forces Peja Stoyakovich into a turnover, which I think the refs called as either a travel or a double dribble. The faces on the Kings bench look utterly confused, as they're probably wondering why Kobe wants this so damn much. While just about every other player would have phoned it in by now, looking forward to a night on the town in Vegas, this is the Mamba, drenched in sweat, giving it his all, trying to win a meaningless preseason game simply because this is who he is, and this is what he does. With the ball back to Los Angeles, Kobe then does this.
Forwards start playing 36 to 38 minutes. 51 seconds, Kobe Bryant hits the three! Yes! He's playing like it counts. 105.99 and he has 27.
This third straight clutch three-pointer gave him a total of 27 points on the evening. It was a 6-point game, but then Sacramento scored again, extending the lead to 8. Then Kobe proceeds to bring the ball up.
Allen, Jason Kidd, you say Kobe in the mix here. Now I know we're missing some other guys. Look at this guy. Are you kidding? 30 for Bryant. Stop. He's 2 steps behind the three-point line. And he's making it look like about an 8-foot jump shooting drill.
Crosses up Doug Christie and buries yet another huge three-point shot, giving him 30 points on the night. There's about 30 seconds left in the game, and the Lakers are down by 5, when this incredible thing happens. The Lakers supporting cast doesn't foul the ball carrier in the back court, to which then Kobe has to intentionally foul in the front court. Everyone else has basically succumbed to defeat, while the Mamba is visibly frustrated at his teammates for not fouling earlier in the possession. I gotta be honest, as a lifelong Lakers fan, it's very rare that I don't know who a Lakers player is. But I must admit, I have no idea who the hell this is talking to Kobe. If you look really closely though, you can read their lips on their interaction. Generic create a player says, "Hey bro, relax, it's just the preseason." To which Kobe responds, "Hey bro, you're not gonna be on the team tomorrow." Ultimately, the deficit was too much, and the Lakers did end up losing the game. That meant absolutely nothing to their eventual third straight championship run. Now you might be looking at this topic, wondering why this worthless preseason game was even worth a video. But that is exactly my point. To almost all of us, this is just a meaningless preseason affair. But to Kobe, this was a match worth giving it his all, and he held his teammates to that same standard. To me, there is no greater example of what made Kobe so special than the fact that as a 2-time champion with nothing to prove, he treated a preseason game in Vegas like it was a Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and as if he was yet to win a ring. Let me take you back in time. It's the 06 to 07 NBA season. We're in the NBA playoffs and the Western Conference is just as competitive as ever before. The 8th-seeded Warriors had just shockingly upset the 1st-seeded Dallas Mavericks. The veteran-led San Antonio Spurs appeared poised for yet another deep postseason run, and the Phoenix Suns were looking as if they were finally ready to win their first championship in franchise history, as they were led by the recent back-to-back MVP winner. And unlike the previous season, the Suns were actually completely healthy in time for the playoffs. With the defending Western Conference champions now eliminated from the playoffs, everyone understood quite well that the two strongest teams remaining in the West were the San Antonio Spurs and the Phoenix Suns. At this point in history, the Western Conference was considered to be much stronger than the Eastern Conference. So the popular belief was that whoever won the matchup between the Spurs and Suns would be the eventual championship winner. As the second seed and the third seed, these two teams were meeting up in the 2007 West semifinals. Leading up to this series, the last time we saw these two teams meet up in the playoffs was in 2005, where the Spurs eliminated the Suns out of the conference finals in just 5 games. Phoenix had grown much stronger since then though, as their defense had significantly improved, and they gained some much needed postseason experience. When the 07 series finally began, it was every bit as competitive as people were hoping it would be. After 3 games, San Antonio was up in the series 2-1, but Phoenix was leading Game 4 heading into the final minutes. A Game 4 victory for Phoenix would not only tie the series, but it would put them in a commanding position, as they would be taking back home court advantage with Games 5 and 7 being played in Phoenix. Now heading into the final moments of Game 4, the series had been a physical one so far. Steve Nash accidentally collided heads with Tony Parker and gruesomely busted his nose. The nose would be re-aggravated several times throughout the series, and due to this, his superstar teammate Amari Stoudemire said that there was a high priority on protecting their MVP winning leader. So with that in mind, let's return to the final few minutes of Game 4. Phoenix is up by 3 points with only seconds left in the game, which means that San Antonio is in a must-foul situation. As Nash has the ball, he's sprinting into the front court, which is where Robert Horry meets him to deliver a strong hip check. With unnecessarily rough contact and seemingly no play on the basketball whatsoever, this was quickly deemed as a flagrant foul on Robert Horry. Obviously, after seeing the 6'10 Robert Horry take a cheap shot on their 6'3 point guard, the Suns team had a very emotional and visceral reaction. Phoenix players like Raja Bell, Sean Marion, and Leandro Barbosa were all physically involved in the commotion on the court. But even with that being the case, none of those players ended up being the central focus of the event. When you draw your attention to the Suns bench, you'll see a couple of players leave their seats and approach the commotion. Among those players was their superstar and their leading scorer, Amari Stoudemire, who was only on the bench in the first place because he had 5 personal fouls. Who also left the bench was their 6'8 power forward, Boris Diaw, who did a little bit of everything for the Suns and was certainly a key part of their rotation. So at this point, unless you're familiar with this historical event, you're probably wondering why Stoudemire and Diaw even matter in this situation. Well, it actually has to do with the NBA's sensitive mindset at that point in time. Before that series had taken place, just a few years earlier, the famous Malice at the Palace happened, which was a giant brawl involving the Pistons, Pacers, and the Detroit crowd. Without a doubt, this horrible event was one of the worst evenings in NBA history, and the league's commissioner at the time, David Stern, vowed to never let something like this ever happen again. As a result, the league immediately became much more strict, punishing players more quickly for technical fouls and doing everything they could to discourage players from escalating potentially dangerous situations. One of the measures that the NBA took was reinforcing the incredibly harsh consequences for any bench players who get involved in an altercation. In the NBA rulebook on Rule number 12, Section 7, letter C, it states that during an altercation, all players not participating in the game must remain in the immediate vicinity of their bench. Violators will be subject to suspension without pay for a minimum of 1 game and fined up to $50,000. This was the rule that they ultimately enforced on Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw, as they were both ultimately suspended for the crucial 5th game in Phoenix. These were the averages of Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw throughout the first 4 games, and this was the level of production that the Suns were now going to miss in Game 5. Despite being severely short-handed, Phoenix still challenged the Spurs in Game 5, ultimately losing the game by just 3 points. And as expected, with now home court advantage and morale on their side, San Antonio closed out the series in the 6th game. If the suspensions never took place, then Phoenix likely wins Game 5. And with Game 7 eventually being played in their building, it's hard to envision the Suns losing that series at full strength. I'm not even a Phoenix Suns fan, but as a basketball fan, this decision to severely punish the Suns in this extremely important series was tremendously frustrating for several reasons. For one, the NBA clearly made this decision in light of their paranoia from the Malice at the Palace. And if this had occurred on most other years, severe punishments likely wouldn't have been ensued. It was also frustrating because the NBA has been extremely inconsistent throughout the years about enforcing this rule. And there have been many other instances before and since where players came off the bench to get involved and were not suspended. So to all of a sudden take extreme measures in a pivotal playoff series that ultimately decided the championship seems like a gross misuse of power. And maybe the biggest reason why it's frustrating is because they essentially rewarded Robert Horry for committing the cheap shot. If Horry did it on purpose just to entice the Phoenix players to leave their bench to support their teammate, then it was a ruthlessly brilliant decision, regardless of it being morally reprehensible. Again, the winner of this series was going to be on cruise control for the NBA championship. Before the playoffs began, people initially believed it was going to be the Dallas Mavericks in the Western Conference Finals, but instead it was the 4th-seeded Utah Jazz, who the San Antonio Spurs dealt with quickly in just 5 games. And then, in the NBA Finals, they easily swept the overachieving and the inexperienced Cleveland Cavaliers. Likely because of this decision to suspend Stoudemire and Diaw, the Phoenix Suns organization still doesn't have an NBA championship banner to this very day, and a former 2-time MVP winner like Steve Nash is frequently criticized for simply having statistics that didn't lead to winning, when in reality, he was stripped of his legitimate opportunity to win. Honestly, it still blows my mind that the players who were most severely punished for the event were guys who were literally not involved in the original altercation. For goodness sake, Raja Bell put his hands on Horry and shoved him, and he was not suspended, but yet Stoudemire and Diaw, who simply stepped forward a few feet, were disqualified from Game 5. In the end, we can only imagine just how much this truly changed history in the grand scheme of things. With the title, Nash is likely considered as one of the select few greatest point guards of all time. Without a ring in 2007, Tim Duncan's legacy and reputation certainly takes a hit, and even a head coach like Mike D'Antoni is probably viewed in a much more positive light by the basketball community with a ring on his finger. It seems like much of the NBA's mainstream media has become unbearable to modern basketball fans. As a man who's in his mid-30s and who's been enjoying the NBA closely for 3 decades, I have a hard time relating to the perceptions of young fans nowadays. But everywhere I look, whether it's on social media or here on YouTube, I see people who have become particularly frustrated with Inside the NBA. Now this is an Emmy-winning show that has given us some of the most hilarious moments in the history of sports television. So how can so many people be turning on this program so intensely and so suddenly? Well, to understand the answer to that question, you have to understand the current climate of the basketball community as a whole. In my years of watching and dissecting professional hoops, I've never witnessed a greater divide in the fandom than where we're at today. Everything seems as if it's old versus the new, and there's no room for any middle ground. You're either someone who hates this current era of the NBA, claiming everyone is soft and entitled, or you're someone who regularly takes a dump on past generations, proclaiming that it was all ran by plumbers and accountants. In many cases, this growing divide has stemmed bitterness and outright disgust between the two factions. As concerns of decreasing NBA viewership continue to persist, everyone is trying to blame each other for this league-wide problem. While older fans and some former NBA players claim that the league today is a worse version of professional hoops, some high-profile people, like the Lakers head coach JJ Redick, have claimed that this sort of negative rhetoric is why people are refusing to tune in. So as you can see, there is this strong belief that some of these cranky has-beens are the reason the NBA is suffering today. And I think the predominant symbol of that demographic are the inside guys, but more specifically Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal. According to young NBA fans today, these guys are known for their hating. They always seem to be throwing guys under the bus, saying that they're weak-minded and claiming that they're not good enough, while they've literally admitted on multiple occasions that they're usually not watching the games that they're commenting on. In a way, this seems like peak ignorance to younger fans, in the sense that they act like they're professionals and authority figures on the subject matter, while admitting that they don't actually care enough to engage with it. Just recently, these guys once again came to the forefront of the division when Charles Barkley made this joke about the Hornets and Wizards game on January 24th.
I tell you what, you had nothing to do today. Oh my goodness. If you went to this game, you had nothing to do today.
To the surprise of absolutely no one, these comments had social media in an uproar, and the outcry was led by my favorite player due to his strong mental fortitude, Kevin Durant. KD made it clear that he didn't find these comments funny, and a multitude of people online agreed with him as they relentlessly blamed Charles Barkley for the low ratings and for holding small market teams back. This is where my perspective comes in if you care enough to listen. This is who Charles Barkley is, and this is who he always has been. Chuck roasting two bottom-feeding teams is a thing that he's been doing since the early 2000s. Even when he was a player, Charles Barkley stood out for the fact that he always said his intrusive thoughts out loud. Back then, he made commercials with his main selling point being the fact that he was not a role model. Let's be real. If social media was around in 1992, people would be claiming that Charles Barkley was the reason that Angola basketball never took off.
I don't know anything about Angola, but Angola's in trouble.
So for me, it seems silly to claim that Charles Barkley has anything to do with the NBA's decline, when this has always been his appeal. Remember, this is the same guy who once had a fallout with one of his best friends, Michael Jordan, because he was so brutally honest about MJ being an incompetent GM. So again, this is who Chuck is, this is who he always has been, and this is likely who he always will be. So to act like this is something new, and that is somehow hurting our current league, is just silly if you ask me. Now admittedly, Shaq on the other hand feels a bit more mean-spirited. He's famous for beating a JaVale McGee joke into the ground, to the point that the joke got stale over time. He's famous for his mostly one-sided beef with Dwight Howard that seems petty and unnecessarily harsh. And in more recent years, he has been relentlessly going after Joel Embiid, repeatedly calling him soft.
Giannis and Embiid is force. Giannis is playing with force, and Embiid is playing SOF capital T. And right here on the other end, he's not playing with force. He's looking for the foul. He has a little band-aid on his little hand. You can't come out before the season's up not playing back-to-back. Say it again. Spell it. SOF capital T.
Now listen. I'm not completely justifying Shaq's actions, because I do feel like he sometimes gets insecure, jealous, and can be very condescending. But I also feel like Shaq's quote hating is often misunderstood and a lot more complex than many people realize. During the early years of Shaq's career, he was quite simply one of the most scrutinized players in the history of the league. Yes, people recognized his talent and his remarkable gifts as an athletically daunting specimen. But with great power comes great responsibilities. Shaq was expected to deliver championships to his team. And after his failure in the 1995 NBA Finals, the negative narratives would begin. When he was selected to be one of the 50 greatest players in NBA history in 1997, a lot of people had a problem with it, claiming that he had won nothing, that he hadn't earned his place, and that he didn't know how to be a leader.
Unable to be here from the Los Angeles Lakers, number 34, Shaquille O'Neal.
These narratives would grow stronger and stronger after he arrived in Los Angeles. Thanks to the talent on the roster, the Lakers had championship expectations as soon as he showed up. But after being gentlemen swept by the Utah Jazz in '97, and swept by the Jazz again in 1998, and then swept by the San Antonio Spurs in 1999, the narrative was firmly established that Shaq was fool's gold. He was constantly scrutinized for living in the shadow of the Lakers before him, like Kareem, Wilt Chamberlain, and George Mikan. I can't stress this enough. This was something that haunted Shaq on a daily basis in the late 1990s, as you couldn't go a day without the LA media putting enormous amount of pressure and criticism on their own. But obviously, Shaq did eventually win the championship in 2000, and that was seen as the validating moment of his career. Suddenly, all of those condemnations disappeared overnight. Shaq viewed this development as a crucial aspect of him evolving into a better man, the leader, and the legend that he was always meant to be. In a way, he viewed it as his own hero's journey. Sure, he might have hated the criticisms at the time he was in it, but now he views those criticisms retroactively as a necessary evil that inspired him to become greater. I genuinely believe that most of the time, this is why Shaq is so brutally critical of other players, but especially of other big men. Based on his own life experiences, he sees it as those players' responsibilities to take the criticisms and go through their own hero's journey. And if you're paying attention, you'll see that Shaq frequently expresses his thoughts along these lines.
I'm going to give it to him like Kareem gave it to me. He should take it as disrespectful. I was averaging big numbers with LA, and but we kept getting swept in the playoffs. Like, okay, Shaq, you're doing that in the regular season, what about in the playoffs? And this article really broke my heart. They asked Kareem, what do you think about Shaq? And Kareem says, well, he hasn't won any championships yet. So that's my message to Mr. Embiid. Like, we know what you can do, but can you do it when it comes time where it really needs to be done? Can you do it at the big dance? Instead of always worrying about being criticized, see if there's some truth in that criticize.
So are the inside guys being too harsh? Maybe. Are they hurting the NBA with their approach? I truly doubt it, because in the grand scheme of things, their approach is really nothing new. And at the end of the day, what makes these guys special is the fact that they're mostly entertainers. I never went to Inside the NBA for expert analysis. Shaq's basketball breakdowns often boil down to telling the big men to simply try harder and give him 28 and 15. And then Chuck is always educating people on how to be a winner, while he in fact never won a championship. Sure, occasionally they'll drop some gems of basketball wisdom, but for the most part, we watch them for the roasting, the laughs, and the shenanigans while they talk hoops. And if that is something that gets you super bent out of shape, then 95% of the time, I'm inclined to think that that's a you problem. And yeah, maybe you're being a little bit too sensitive. So what do you guys think? Are the inside guys part of the problem with viewership and basketball discourse today? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments section below. Shout out to the members for supporting the channel, and thanks for watching as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.